John Macgowan, welcome back into the weeds.
Thanks, mate. It's good to be back.
It's fantastic to have you back by popular demand too, mate. You're super interesting and super popular with the punters, mate. They've all tuned in and more of you, mate. It must be a sign of end times if you are the voice that people want to hear in their heads.
There's no accounting for taste at all.
There is no.
Mind you, it just probably goes to show that like how kind of bad the political scene in this country is right now, where this is probably the best you can get.
Mate. Well, you are the best of the best and a political necromancer and super interesting. Look, let's talk about the election, the election that really matters, and that is for the new Pope.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Come on.
Oh, yeah.
Let's talk about the Pope. So we've had the Holy Father pop off and, valet to the Holy Father. But it's now time for the conclave, mate. You're in the conclave. You're in the Sistine Chapel. Who are you voting for, mate?
Well, it's a hard one, right? Because it's going to come down between, the guys who want to run the Vatican Bank. So the Vatican Bank conspiracy theory time, there's going to be a lot of that. There's going to be a lot of very conservative Africans who are going to want to probably...
Is it time for Black Pope?
I think it is actually time for Black Pope.
I think there's a guy from the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Cardinal Robert Serra.
Yeah.
He's my favourite. He wrote a really nice book. Like, it's funny because, online, the conservative right aren't known for racial equality. But I think everyone is kind of united behind the Robert Serra ticket just because he is so conservative.
He is super conservative.
He's like Kingdom of Heaven, Ridley Scott level, like Crusades, Deus Vult kind of guy.
Yep, he is. And he's also fish where the fishes are. Like the Congo, I think the birth rate there's still like double digits.
But there's a lot of other sketchy ones, like a lot of oddball Jesuits with unusual views. And I don't know. It's going to be an interesting one. One of the most interesting things about this one is the betting markets, right? Because you haven't really had papal betting markets before. Like maybe Sportsbet chucked a cheeky one up last time. But last time was a surprise, right? Because Benedict just stepped down. So this time we've got Polymarket, we've got all the analytics.
Really? You can have a punt on the pontiff?
You can have a punt on the pontiff. And what's interesting is that they've had the market for who will be the next pope going for about 3 or 4 months already.
Ooh.
And so that when Francis started getting health problems back in like early March, you could actually see the wiggle on the betting markets. That's where he's got the best name out of the entire conclave, Pietro Pizza Baller. That's where he shot up. He became a household name. Yeah, Pizza Baller. I mean, it's kind of like
there's never
being named Soprano Gabagool. Kind of Italian name is Pizza Baller. Anyway.
Well, the last guy was Argentinian, but he was Italian, and there's never really been a non-European. There's a chance for a brown. There's a guy from Myanmar, a Filipino guy.
The Chinese ones are sketchy because all the Chinese cardinals are kind of like handpicked by the CCP for not being controversial. So,
okay.
Yeah, I don't think there's no hope of a Chinese pope. But yeah, I think the African cohort's really good. I mean, because also with the current situation with the Catholic Church, I mean, the good thing about the African guys is no one's ever really had an issue with the African guys getting touchy-feely. Like there's something about the African church that they don't indulge in that stuff. They do indulge in some like extreme political extremism.
Yep.
Like, which I think we all want to see.
There's a bit of homophobia happening over there.
A lot.
Isn't it still a capital punishment?
Probably, yeah. They don't do Pride Month near any tall buildings in some of those places.
Yeah, but it's a place where there's a lot of there's a massive population growth. If they're looking for punters, if they're looking for supporters, that's the place for them to go, isn't it?
So it'd be nice to see what they do, but I don't know. It's probably more interesting than our election.
Exactly. But it's injected itself into our election because it's sucked what little oxygen there was in it's pretty anaerobic,
weirdly enough, for the third time. So I found this out because there was some supposed expert on the ABC the other day who said, it's the first time a pope has died during an Australian election campaign. I thought that doesn't sound right. No. We have election campaigns every 3 years. Popes die a lot.
Yeah.
So we had one in the middle of the 2014 election campaign died. And Menzies called the 58 election like a week after the Pope died.
Right.
So we've actually had this happen twice before. And because back in 1914 and 1958, I imagine the Pope dying was a much bigger deal to Australian Catholics than who the next Prime Minister was.
Well, maybe Albo got the tip. Like,
Maybe
you know,
he did.
like Frank's, you know, not well. Just hang in there. You're a Catholic. You'll look like as a leader.
That's one of my favorite conspiracy theories right now that I'm seeing a lot of, is that somehow these guys know that things are about to get really bad, and that's why the campaign is so bad. No one wants to actually be in government. And so when you look at how like bad the Liberals ads are, like it's actually they're trying to throw it. No one wants to be holding this hot potato, whether or not it's like World War III or
The Depression,
alien invasion, like whatever it's going to be that happens this year. No one wants
Independence Day.
Yeah, it could be that. You know, the rapture. Maybe that's Francis, which is the first to go.
Yep.
It is also really funny that the last person to shake Francis's hand was JD Vance.
Yeah, I've
And-
heard this.
Yeah, and then as soon as that happened,
The
JD
kiss of
Vance.
death.
Yeah, then JD Vance goes to India, and there's immediately a terrorist attack.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking the only hope for the Australian election is get JD Vance over here, see what happens.
Inject JD Vance and zombie apocalypse.
Yeah. See if JD can actually make it interesting for us.
Well, it looks like Dutton's going to need an intervention, a zombie apocalypse. There's been a few things. You're like, you know, if you want anything, the Chinese say, if you want anything in life, it's luck.
Yeah.
Dutton came in. He was probably, you know, in a pretty strong position. We've had a cyclone.
Yeah.
Which has really thrown things off. We've had Trump come out and like
Existing.
just
Like,
exist.
yeah.
I mean, Kevin Bloody Wilson's got a song out at the moment called, you know, "What's Trump Doing Today?"
Yeah.
You know, he's annoying like that cohort. If that cohort had pissed off with, you know, having to wake up and
that's kind of like
look inside his head.
Patient X, if you want to like put all of Dutton's missteps one after another. I mean, his first misstep was ever believing that punters kind of wanted Trumpism in any way. I mean, like I do, but I mean, you guys have seen me on the last podcast. I'm not in any way the majority of people, right? But it's like he thought maybe that was going to play well when it was in fact going to play really badly. That voters are terrified of that. Voters don't want that for our country. And so he runs into these troubles with his Jacinta Price Doge, which was one of the dumbest things that's ever happened in Australian politics.
Even the woke stuff, you know, woke,
It's just not
broke,
playing
and
as well.
Yeah, I know it just doesn't play.
But plus, because it's all kind of over. I mean, this is one of the cool things about Trump winning in the United States, because so much of that woke stuff is downstream from entertainment culture. So when Trump kind of changes the political culture of the United States, he actually changes the political culture of countries like us and Canada and elsewhere just by osmosis, because we consume all of their media. So there's really no need for us to waste that much intellectual time on things like, you know, the trans questions or, you know, what kids learn in school and stuff, or what, you know, what content of Netflix shows, because the Americans are already dealing with that at that level. So I think it was always a misstep from him to do that. And yeah, he's paying a hefty price for it. Like,
He really is. There's some like we're about a week out from the election when we're recording this, and there's some marginal seat polling that looks really bad. It looks like Labor's actually starting to campaign now in Liberal marginal, so they look like they're going on the offensive. The narrative's bad. It looks like a lot of voters are turning up. You know, they've made their minds up. It could be a bit of a train wreck.
I don't think it's going to be one of those landslide elections like we've seen in the past. Like, I don't think it's going to be a replay of 2019 or 13 or 7. I think the only the only way Dutton, I think, could potentially save the furniture is, I think, the two-party preferreds that you're seeing coming out from the major polls really overestimating preference flow to Labor from the minor parties.
Yeah.
I mean, I've just seen your how to vote card, right? I don't see the Australian Labor Party on there, right?
Here we go.
Legalised cannabis. Yeah.
Look for the Leaf. Look for Ned.
When they're looking at preference flows in the House of Reps, really all they have to go off is the last one. And, you know, in 2019, particularly with UAP, who probably did the best out of the minor parties, I mean, that campaign, 80% of preferences before exhaustion went to the Libs because that was 2019. in 2022, 31% of UAP preferences went to Labor because people were out there with brickbats for Morrison. It was kind of a high watermark for Labor in the preferences they were going to get from the minor parties. I mean, I don't really think that's going to happen this time. And in some of these close races where you have Teals and Greens, and particularly from the right, like Libertarians, Trumpeter Patriots, Freedom Party, this thinking that, like, why not just have the Greens or the Teals ahead of the Liberal and Labor Party and finally get rid of these guys? I think that's going to drag down the two-party preferred on election. I don't think it's going to be as good as it looks right now. But in some of these key marginals, I mean, Victoria looks awful. I don't think that's going to go really well for them. I don't think they're doing particularly well in Sydney. The only hope for the Libs is that the Teals aren't doing that well. And the kind of Teal campaign machine that we got used to over the last two terms has really kind of fallen apart. And now all they're doing is, embarrassing themselves at forums and arguing over core flutes, and the days of them being out there running a persuasive case on climate change and things like that.
Has anyone heard
no,
that has not been mentioned?
To do that. A big factor there is money. I mean, when you rely on people who aren't institutional donors, a lot of these guys, the renewable investment sector who turned out in 19 and 2022 to donate to the Teals, I mean, they were doing so on the basis that they were being promised that, oh, look, we're going to change all the laws. We're going to have net zero. Everyone's going to make a bunch of money out of solar farms and wind farms. And when that doesn't happen, two terms of that, I mean, you put the hat back around, people aren't going to donate.
And like, I think that just no one believes the nuclear spiel from
which
Dutton.
Which is really sad, because I mean, nuclear is a great alternative energy policy for Australia. It's just we had a party take it to an election where it sucked, and now I mean we've set back nuclear in Australia, I think, by a decade. I think it's going to be a real struggle for anyone to come back unless there's something like some kind of energy crisis where you can do it from inside government and without a mandate.
Or someone comes up with nuclear fission, isn't it?
Yeah, or I just think the best approach for it would have always been to just say, we're just going to build one. Like, no complicated 7 reactors, no experimental
just one
technology.
in the desert in South Australia.
Just one and see how it goes as a proof of concept. Like when the Americans said they were going to the moon, they didn't say we're going to go to the moon 11 times and we're going to build a fucking base up there. And they just said, well, we're going to go once and see if it works, right? So we should be doing the same thing. We should be saying, well, we'll just do it once and test it. Even a really modest policy like saying, well, we'll expand Lucas Heights or something, or figure out a way to plug Lucas Heights into the grid or build something out there, something modest to socialize it with the public. Instead, he just came out with this, I'm going to just build 7 reactors.
Or as part of some gigantic industrial park out in northwest WA, like, we're gonna have a whole heap of data centers. We're going to power Asia or something like that.
We're going to be building aluminium again or something. I mean, this is the fundamental problem though with how bad the campaign is.
Or refining critical minerals or something like that.
No one believes these guys at all. And I mean, there's a smart thing about Labor's campaign is because I don't think anyone believes them either. But Labor are cleverly campaigning without like any real genuine commitments. So there's nothing really on Labor's dance card where the punters are going, well, I don't believe they'll ever actually do that. Everything Labor's saying seems eminently achievable, whereas everything Dutton is saying, people don't believe them anyway.
They're just tacking on bits to policies they've already got, So
and then occasionally walking them back, and which is he's done today on his EVs.
I know.
Yeah,
and I didn't even know what the policy was on EVs, but all I read is he just walked something back.
I think he was going to either get rid of the luxury car tax on them or put it on. It's hard to say with Dutton. Like, it could have got either way. I think in 2019 we were going to get rid of it, and then they were going to put it back on. Like, it's one of those policies I don't think even they understand.
No, and most people just say, walk back. And like, there's been, another, in terms of bad luck for Dutton has been, not only the fact that the Trump's, won this sort of culture war in the States, as you say, that's flowed through it. All the heat's gone out of it. But the tariff thing is just like, it just looks like total like chaos.
Which no one in Australia likes. We're not a chaos constituency.
No, and we're a free trade country. We're like, we're completely dependent on getting shit, in bulk to China and Japan.
There was absolutely a political pathway to use that and exploit it. Like, you could have said this provides opportunities for Australia. You could have done all kinds of things with it. Instead, I mean, and one of the biggest problems with both Dutton and Albanese.
I mean, what are the opportunities? Like set up manufacturing here?
Go
or-
somewhere else. Or,
Yeah,
or
right.
the other thing is, I mean, you can do private partnerships on the US mainland. Like you can offer tax breaks here. You can do all kinds of things. But one of their biggest problems, and it applies to both of them, but it's hurting Dutton more because he doesn't seem to understand where his voters are now. But he's only really communicating and kind of being guided by the mainstream media. So he wakes up in the morning and he reads what the Daily Telegraph is saying on tariffs, which is completely disingenuous. He's reading what the Australian says on tariffs, which is disingenuous. He's reading what the ABC and all the lefty academics are saying about tariffs. And then he's responding to that. And he's not responding to what actual voters think about the tariffs, which is generally just either they don't understand it or they're concerned about their superannuation.
That's what I said. Superannuation. That's what I did. I went, fuck.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
does this mean to
So
me?
no-
There's only one horse in the race, self-interest.
Exactly.
And all of a sudden, there's
House prices.
Yeah, house prices. There's a wipeout on Wall Street, and people
Yeah.
like all the boomers are going, I'm $30,000.
And so because of this fact that he's only being talked to and talking to the media, there's this disconnect from voters' values and his voters and his values. And that's why they're all over the place on things like housing, right? I mean, both parties are now wedded to a policy of making house prices go up. And which
subsidising.
And so we walked into this campaign saying we've got to make housing more affordable. And now halfway through the campaign, we've not only said, well, housing is going to go up forever, but now like Labor's putting a figure on it. Labor's saying, oh, I want 10% increases, which is completely insane when you think about it. Like you can't have an asset class that just goes up on a logarithmic scale forever. That's not how markets work. So we're now at that point in the campaign where everyone's just forgotten about making housing cheaper for young people, which is going to take structural reform that none of them want to undertake. It's now just a casino where they're betting on, will the 5% deposit schemes or superannuation schemes or all these other demand subsidies, will they send prices up? Will they keep them steady? Will they allow anyone to enter the market who couldn't already? And I really don't think any of them are going to work. None of them have worked so far. We've had first homeowners grants in this country now for close to 20 years. And people still can't afford a house.
They just get sucked up in the profits.
It'll just keep sending the prices up and up and up. And I mean, he's hitting, there's like a demographic cliff coming on this stuff. Because at the end of the day,
I had a look at the numbers of young people in the seat of Griffith, Ryan, those inner city seats at Labor, and two of them, the Greens held in inner city Brisbane. Like the numbers of 20 to 29-year-olds in those seats are in the high 20s. And if you go up to 40, it's like 40%. Of people are that age group. You've really got to be doing something for those Gen Z younger millennials. Otherwise, you're toast.
Well, and plus, they're going to keep getting older and keep voting, and everyone else is going to die off. And what I was going to say was that if you look at the demographics, I mean, for most of these generations, you've still got 1.x children being born. So as the boomers come offline, as in die, and their estates aren't just going to go to one kid. Their estates are going to get divided up. So if you've got parents who've been sitting on, $500,000, let's say like the average, like say like $500,000 in super and a $1.5 million house, so $2 million, and they got two kids. Well, that's $1 million going to each. Now that'll let them get into the market, but not at the same level as their parents and not with the same retirement savings. So it's not just a one-for-one wealth transfer as the boomers come offline. We're going to see
this massive depreciation of the value.
I mean, I'm an only child, so I'm lucky, but I'll get one for one, but most people won't, right? And so the economy isn't just going to naturally right itself. Housing isn't just going to become affordable in the next decade and a half as boomers die. It's actually become less affordable because you're going to be losing these houses. All these estates are going to get divided in half or even further, depending on how many kids you had. So there's no pathway out of the housing crisis right now except immigration.
And it's just, and I just can't believe that Dutton hasn't gone incredibly hard on it. It's just this remarkable, I think, opportunity he had to totally talk about the demand side right on the, he could have built a narrative sort of like that echoed Howard, you
Yeah.
know, back in the early 2000s about controlling the nature
Yeah.
of immigration without, you know, touching, you know, like some of the more, you know,
Well,
xenophobic parts of it.
Immigration has become what used to be one of like not the best policy. It could be occasionally one of the stupidest policies in Australian politics, but one of the easiest ones to wield politically. It has now become like what the NDIS is, which is just you lock it away in a cupboard and you don't want to talk about it because there's so many people self-interested in it. No matter what you do, you're going to lose votes. I mean, the Liberals' own migration services spokesman, his wife owns a migration services business. I think that should have been the biggest story of the campaign.
I know.
Like that should have wiped Dutton's credibility on immigration out on day one. But at this point, people just kind of shrug and go, "Oh well, they all own dozens of houses. They're all self-interested." No one cares anymore. 10 years ago, that would have been a crisis.
Yeah.
Now, like, I mean, you can't tell me they didn't already know about it because they're going to fundraisers with his wife and all the other migration agents talking about bringing more people out. Like, and then you wonder why people are going crazy. And this is part of the reason why. So the immigration thing should have been an easy get for them. Instead, we're going to come out of this election with roughly the same immigration numbers we had going into it. I mean, no one's got an alternative. I have been saying to people, though, that I think if you want to see lower migration rates over the next 5 years, vote Labor, because maybe there's a chance the Liberals' 25% reductions may take the heat out of it for a couple of years. But if Labor continue to let it go on the way it is, in 3 years' time, the next campaign is going to be fought on a full freeze.
Yep.
Like no one is going to let it keep going the way it is. Now, hopefully they're smart enough to see that coming, but when there's so much money involved, and when the 21 key seats they're campaigning in are overwhelmingly overrepresented by ethnic minorities, then maybe they won't. Maybe they'll just think, oh, well, we can keep winning elections if we just keep pandering to the same people and, you know, indulging the lobbying of the migration agent industry, which wasn't an industry that had a lobby back when I was there. This is a recent thing. So they just won't touch it, just like they're not touching the NDIS, which is one of the craziest things that we have in Australia right now. 25% of the Australian public is now disabled.
Yeah.
And another 25% profit from it. So no one's touching it. No one's looking at it. It's running, the cost overrun is insane.
Is it blowing right out?
It is blowing right out. And it's just the social impact.
What percentage of the budget is it now?
Oh, well, it's approaching the actual scale of the health budget itself.
No.
Yeah. We're looking at billions and billions of dollars per year because the federal health budget isn't that much, really.
Yeah.
Like, they don't have to build any hospitals, not like the States. And it's just blowing out by billions per year. And they can't control it. I mean, they've tried to control it a little bit. They've said, I mean, Bill Shorten said, we're not going to let you go to the broth anymore.
Yeah.
That was the only kind of thing he held back and said, we're not going to have, any more.
Which I think was wrong.
Well, actually, I think that was one of the only good things.
I think that was like, legitimate service and really getting some, some money flowing around the economy and also normalizing,
normalizing sex work
for
autistic blokes.
For autistic and people with,
Which I don't know if it was ever.
CP.
I don't think if autistic blokes ever really cared whether it was normal or not. I certainly didn't.
Well, Labor's been lucky, but they certainly like Sun Tzu, you pick the territory, you pick the timing. They were able to move. They were able to move the election back, saying, there's a cyclone. They've plopped it right in the middle of, holidays, Anzac Day, which is, starved some oxygen in there. They've been pretty nimble on some stuff, and also Albo's been doing a pretty good job. He looked pretty wobbly for a long time against the right. They've certainly done some training over summer and come out and looking like on message.
I've only watched one of the debates because they're so painful to watch. Like
I watch none, so
they cause me physical harm to watch them. But the one I did watch, what occurred to me was that Albo has aged so much since he kind of first became leader, that he looks craggy, he sounds gravelly, and so he almost has that like Biden-esque charm now, but with the memory, like and so it can't, because Dutton has looked the same age for the last 25 years. So Albo just kind of does have this weird seniority over him. He's like 15, 20 years older than him, I think.
Is he?
Yeah. Albo is like 65, I think. And Dutton's like either in his late 40s or his early 50s. So he is quite a bit younger. And normally that doesn't really matter in campaigns.
Yeah, Dutton's looked the same since
I've
he was 20.
I've never seen an
5 years
Australian
old.
campaign except for the last Howard one where age came up. And I mean, by that point, I mean, Howard was, crumbling to dust occasionally. But now with now with Albo, you can't look at him and go, yeah, he probably knows what he's talking about.
Yeah,
Like,
he's been around. And look, he knows the insides out, and he seems on message and able to be.
Yeah, he's on the Labor campaign message. The underlying problem for him, of course, is that they don't have any actual ideological values anymore, but neither do the Liberals. So it's kind of like so many of the flaws of their respective campaigns and their respective political operations just cancel each other out. And this is where Dutton's performance is so disappointing.
Yeah, nepotism.
He only had to bring 1% of an ideological platform. He only had to bring a slither
Something
of
he believed,
personality and authenticity, and he could have won it. But instead, just by matching timidity with timidity and tepidness with tepidness, of course he's going to lose because Albo's been there and he's been doing it longer and he's been doing it better. So why are you going to buy, a product that you don't know if it's going to work, or you're going to buy the broken product that you know already doesn't work? And that's where we're at with the campaign. And the voters are responding to that. I know arch conservatives who are sitting there telling me, they're going, I don't really care anymore. Like Albo, Dutton, what's the difference?
Legalize cannabis. Look for the lead.
Yeah.
Just in the privacy of the.
You guys have this massive political. You have a political problem that is unique to Australian politics. I've never seen it happen before. Whereas cannabis is now effectively legal. So you've got the campaign for you is over, and now how do you challenge people to get them to vote for you? You need to I think you need to change the name to normalize cannabis or
just
more
cannabis,
or just cannabis.
Just cannabis. And
Yeah.
it's going to be a gigantic industry. Yeah, we're now campaigning on the price of cannabis,
Yeah, well, that's true, dude. It is so expensive.
Yeah.
I don't buy it, but I speak to, particularly, I'm noticing it's young women who go to the dispensaries and get these scripts, and it is crazy expensive.
It is.
Like $400 to $500 a month. People are blowing on it. And
yeah, that's exactly right. And when they could just be growing it, and you could get it from
you should be growing it in your house.
growing it in your own home. Just have a little tent. Grow
You
it
should be
yourself.
campaigning on tax deductible and PBS cannabis.
Yes. No, that is exactly that is our campaign. It should be on the PBS. And you should just be able to get it from a farmer's market. That's just organic farmer's market cannabis. And so I think we're part of that wave of people who are looking around at just anyone but the majors. The other party votes now going to be in the 30s. That sort of thing.
I think I said when I was here last time that we were looking at the lowest ever primary vote for the major parties, and back then it was actually still at 67.
Yeah,
I mean Labor's primary has gone up, so now
it's 31.
Yeah,
which is crazy to think. 69% of people are going to say no. To the party of government.
There's a great piece.
It's what?
Yeah, there was a great piece on the ABC today where they actually showed that comparison of the spread of votes over time from the 1970s, and it was just a flat line in the 70s. Everyone either voted for the Liberal or Labor Party, and now it's just ballooned out into this triangle spread of votes. No one really is that keen on giving their first preference to the major parties anymore, which is just a huge problem for them. That they have shown to date no desire to fix. You would have thought this campaign...
Yeah, they're locked in this binary sort of death match into, oblivion.
There's no innovation, no reform.
The same sort of people. You've got a Catholic
campaign
versus a Freemason.
They don't change it up. And they haven't learned the lessons from around the world. And then when they think they're learning the lessons, they're learning the wrong ones, like with Trump. I mean... I know a lot of these guys on both sides, and in their minds, 2016 and 2024... they kind of think Trump is this thing that's going to change the Australian political culture, and it's really not. I mean, the single biggest thing that changed Australian political culture and really reset Australian political culture in the last decade was COVID, right? COVID was a completely transformative moment in Australian politics. The Americans had already had theirs with Trump. So Trump's in 2016, right? By the time COVID comes along, COVID doesn't really affect them culturally and socially that much because they'd already had the chaos of Trump. By that point, the American mind is just used to weird shit going on. So they adapt. It was the same in the UK because the UK had already had Brexit. They're already used to, they've already had the mask off moment with their elites. And Australia really hadn't. Going into COVID, the average Australian, I mean, if the campaign they're running today was run in 2019, and we are actually seeing really the same campaign that was run in 2019, voters looked at that and went, yeah, look, I don't like these guys, but I broadly trust them. I know they have my best interests at heart. I'm going to pick between who's going to do the best things for me, and politicians are just a fact of life that exists, and I don't really care about them that much. Post-COVID, when you were locked in a room, hanging off these guys' every word at 11 o'clock in the morning, whether it was Gladys Berejiklian's press conference or Scott Morrison's press conference, when Australians for the first time, this was the first time they'd really had to pay attention. The Americans had to pay attention in 16. The British had to pay attention in 16. For the first time, Australians did it. And it was like the mask off moment. Like there's a J.G. Ballard quote. He calls the naked lunch the moment when everyone sees what's on the end of their fork, right? That was the moment for the Australian public. When you're waking up every morning and you're worried that you're going to die, or you're worried that or the opposite, you're worried that you're not going to die and there's people keeping you in prison for no reason. And then you see the character of the people doing it and you really analyse it for the first time, changed Australian political culture forever. And the kind of lackadaisical...
And what did people see?
Well, they saw a bunch of morons. And like we laugh. Like I didn't laugh at the time.
I wasn't surprised at all.
Well, it's not, we worked in politics, right? There shouldn't be a surprise.
I am one.
But you know what? Honestly, like there was a moment. I remember there was one moment in COVID where I mean, you know me. I don't take politics that seriously, and I don't take it personally. But there was one moment during COVID, right at the beginning when things were very uncertain, and I was in hotel quarantine. I'd only just got back, and this was right when it first started. And I turned on the TV one day, and I won't say the guy's name because he's one of the few people that sue me, but there was one Australian political leader in particular that I knew. This guy was on so much lithium, he had such grave mental health problems, he wouldn't be allowed to drive heavy machinery, right? And it occurred to me, I was like, wait a second, that guy's in the National Cabinet. And he's making decisions about, he's locking people in little tiny boxes and he's telling everyone they can't go outside. He's shutting down our economy. And then a couple of weeks later, he's telling everyone to take untested vaccines. Whether or not you think they work or not, doesn't matter. It was just the fact that these are the guys, right?
And people tuned in
your head. And it's you know, in people's minds, you kind of have this assumption. It's kind of like the origin of so many conspiracy theories, right? Everyone just kind of assumes that there's like a dark room somewhere with a bunch of really serious people smoking cigars who are in control of everything. And that the reason why nothing really bad ever happens is because these guys behind the scenes take care of everything. And COVID woke the Australian public up to the fact there is no room full of guys looking after you. It's those idiots that you see on TV every night.
Yeah.
And if something ever happens, it's really bad. They're the guys who've got to do it. And I just think it ripped the shreds out of the electorate's psyche. And they've realised, wow, it doesn't even matter who we vote for. I mean, look, Victoria got Dan Andrews, we got Gladys Berejiklian, Scott Morrison was in charge of the whole thing. If you shuffle all the pieces around, like nothing changes. This is our political culture. And it all seems, you know, like fun and games when they're just arguing over tax rates and, you know, how much welfare you get and how much, you know, a can of beer costs. It all seems fine. But when you get to a life and death situation and these guys are in charge, I think people really freaked out.
And do you think it sets up, like, you know, undermines democracy where you just, people are voting for, you know, clown car political parties,
well, I think
or whatever?
Well, it does both, right? I mean, I think there's a sector of the public that you see swing, I think, to the right who have become extremely anti-democratic as a result of it. Because they're now looking at it saying, well, you know, is this the best we can do? Is this the best system we have?
Are we just about to end Handmaid's Tale in the States?
And then on the flip side, you get this sense of political nihilism where it's just like, well, it doesn't matter. I mean, who cares? I might as well vote for, you know, the biggest lunatic on the ballot because, and this is where the kind of Trumpism comes from in the United States. When things got so bad in the US that people went, well, could Donald Trump do any worse than the guys who got us stuck in a war for 20 years and crashed the economy and got all their friends' lobbyist jobs and made all this money and destroyed our lives? Can anything get any worse than the orange-skinned property developer Like Donald Trump is a completely logical reaction to the condition of the United States, economy and society in 2015, 2016. It makes
Just a
perfect
massive
sense.
disruption. Throw him in there. And
Now, but we've kind of moved. Australia's an interesting electorate because we've kind of moved beyond that. I mean, if Donald Trump shows up in Australia, people are going to have the same kind of challenge they do with the politicians now, which is they're going to look at him and go, "You're still a moron." Like Australia's savior. I mean, this gets talked about a lot in the right. Everyone's going, "Oh, where's our Trump? When's our Trump going to come?" But that's not going to be who saves Australian politics. It's going to be someone with, a character more like someone like Malcolm Turnbull, someone who is smart, someone who is successful, someone who knows what they're talking about and can bring people together, which are, of course, things that Malcolm Turnbull can only do 2 out of 3 of those. But we're going to end up needing someone like that. It's not
like
just
competing,
it's
someone who goes, okay, we reset our strategic alliances and we're going to reform our taxation. We're going to engage with like Indonesia.
And the reality is,
ASEAN or something.
if that person even exists yet, they're probably in high school. Like we're probably talking 20 years before you can make that happen because the way the parties work right now, I mean, someone just that smart can't get in. Right, these places preference idiots. There's no reason.
What's the Russian word for useful idiot? I can't remember.
Yeah. I think it's just useful idiot.
It is just
in Russian.
Yeah, but in Russian, yeah. But that's who that's who gets the job.
Well, because no one wants a smart guy, right?
No.
Because the smart guys have caused them nothing but problems. I mean, you look
know.
at Paul Keating causes the Labor Party nothing but problems. Bob Carr causes the Labor Party nothing
George
but problems.
Mladenov came on the podcast, King George, and I was going, he'd be a good politician. Then I went, no, in actual fact, he's like way better politician than me. I don't want to give that guy a job.
Right, exactly. And that's the logic.
He'll have me
That's
out
the logic,
in 2 weeks.
right? I've seen it firsthand.
He's stand up Machiavelli any day.
I saw it firsthand in the Liberals over the years. Like I remember he would go to functions, and this was back when they were always arguing about, the Liberal Party needs more women, and I'd go to functions. These girls in the Young Liberals would always be like so eloquent and so well put together, and they'd always be prepared for all the conferences and stuff. And then you'd see them consistently beaten in pre-selections by like a bloke in jean shorts, with like male pattern baldness and pimples, and they'd get the pre-selection. And you'd sit there and go, "Why is that?" And it's because the guys who are in charge of the pre-selection, they don't want a threat, and that's why the most successful women in Liberal Party politics became like snakes in the grass. Like they played themselves down. Gladys Berejiklian was a great example of that, right? You keep quiet, you keep your head down, and then you pop up.
Susan Lay.
Yeah, right. That's how the smart ones did it. Like there's this poor girl, Charlotte Mortlock, who runs a thing called Humour's Network, and it's like this kind of homespun attempt to improve female engagement in the Liberal Party. And she's really good at it. She's never going to get pre-selection, though, because she's like, who starts their own organisation like that in the Liberal Party? That kind of agency and initiative is not going to be rewarded in that organisation. She's already marked herself as a troublemaker. So they're not going to pre-select her. The women they pre-selected over the last decade tend to be ones who run once, lose, keep their mouth shut, run a second time, lose, keep their mouth shut, and then maybe their 4th or 5th time that they've kept their mouth shut, they'll get the nod. Right. I mean, and that doesn't just apply to the women, it applies to everyone in the party. If you pop up and you have some kind of like interesting ideas, guys like Jared Rennick, I mean, there's the biggest story, I think.
So he's the former Queensland LNP candidate. Got spat out. What did he walk over?
I can't remember if it was vaccines or I think
it was a combo of a couple of things.
He was deep into vaccine stuff. That's kind of the real division with a lot of the guys on the fringes of politics. Like who could keep their shit together about COVID and keep their mouths shut versus the ones who were looking at it happen and going, I can't keep my mouth shut about this. And look at who's been successful and who hasn't. It's interesting because Rennick, back when Rennick was up there and Rennick was in the papers every day, he was always matched with Alex Antic. And Antic had many of the same kind of views. But you have not seen Alex Antic pop up once this campaign. Like he's been locked in a box, the same box I had Andrew Hastie in to yesterday.
Yes, I wanted to bring up Hastie. Where is he?
Tasty
been?
Hasty.
Tasty Hastie. But He's been in hiding. He's been
He's been-
down
yeah,
like
anyone
doing a
with a
tour
pers-
of Margaret River.
Yeah.
You know,
Everyone with a personality
vineyards.
has been just hidden away because, I mean, this is the problem, right? I mean, the electorate says they want authenticity. The electorate says they want people who sound like normal people. So if your two leaders are not normal people who don't sound authentic, it's a real danger for you to have people like that popping up because the electorate's going to get big ideas. They're going to be like, well, if this product exists on the shelf, why do I want that product that sounds like a moron? I mean, the Nationals have done this really well with like Little Proud has basically banished Barnaby to his electorate and he's not allowed to leave. My favourite story of the entire campaign.
Where is Barnaby? He's been turning up on Sunrise.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
I think that's
live from
I don't
the.
know how that works. I think it's almost like contractual with them, I think. But he did. There was a story, a young journalist from the SMH did a story about it the other day. He just drove up there and he caught Barnaby walking out of the shops with a six-pack with Vicky and the kids and just shoved a microphone in his face and started interviewing him. Now, compared to everyone else in this campaign who runs a million miles a minute from questions and interviews, Barnaby just stops outside of BWS and gives him like a 20-minute interview.
In his
And it's hilarious.
business shirt, in his business
Yeah.
shirt, and his boardies.
And it's the funniest thing because he's just like brutally honest. Like he just says, yeah, Little Proud's basically banished me to the bush. I'm not allowed out, but I like it. Like it was a really good interview. And this is the thing. Barnaby's like an authentic, normal guy. I mean, he doesn't like, we talked about Barnaby on here last time.
Yeah.
You don't want him in this campaign if you're Dutton, Albanese, Little Proud, like guys who are literally reading off auto cues, 3-word slogans that have been workshopped through really bad focus groups. The last thing you want is Barnaby Joyce out there saying something.
You've got
random.
it's like having someone who's just doing, stand-up shtick, like jokes that you've all heard 1,000 times. And there's someone who's just a fantastic improv.
Yeah,
You know,
you
you just
don't
go,
want that.
"Hold on."
You know? I mean, and this was where like Trump rewrote the rules, right? Like Trump rewrote the rules in his, the primaries, where he's just getting up and he treated it like an entertainment product. He wasn't designing an election campaign. He was designing a public performance.
Yeah.
And
He's calling out people in the crowd. What do you think? Like he's talking people to death.
his wife's ugly as a dog, like stuff like that. I mean, the public loved it, right? Now, our guys can't do that, but I mean, our guys can just be like themselves. And a great example of where you
And have heard that Peter Dutton actually has a personality. He's not bad one-on-one. He probably have some cracking yarns about cracking heads.
The question is, and like there'll be a lot of workshopping this after the campaign. I think like the campaign teams will split in half and kind of attack each other over it. But who was responsible for keeping Dutton in the box? Was it Dutton himself like not having the confidence to think that his authentic self was marketable? Or was it the campaign team saying, don't be the real Dutton, just because no one likes him? Well, which was it? And that's going to cause a lot of recriminations afterwards. Because I remember the limp-wristed thing when he made the limp-wristed comment.
Yeah.
And it sounded like almost like something he would normally say, but then I counted that within 40 minutes,
he'd walked it back.
He said, "Yeah, I apologize." Like, really?
He could have just said it's like
That's a bit limp-wristed of you.
Yeah. But I get the sense with Albo, the sort of Albo we see is the Albo that exists. He's been such a creature of the Labor Party for so long that and so guarded.
These guys lose their personalities after a while. Like they just have them like shorn off them through a process of, just being worn down by the Canberra Press Gallery. Just puts them through this process of taking off any of the rough edges, any hint of a personality,
self-censorship.
Yeah, it just all goes.
And we saw that because Hasty's got like a lot to say about defence.
He did until yesterday.
And one of the things he did say, has said in the past, is that women, in terms of frontline combat, can be problematic to
not dying.
Not dying. And
problematic to their lives.
Yeah, to their lives, but also in terms of morale in your unit and the rest. He had a whole range of reasons. He's held that view, but then he's
walked it back now.
He's walked it back.
Apparently, it's misogynistic if you don't want women to get exploded by FPV drones. Like that means you hate women.
Yeah,
if you don't want them.
And when I saw the debate, I was reminded of the marriage equality debate, and that was the marriage equality debate started off in the 70s with all the gays saying, "Fuck that, we don't want to be married. Like, why would we sign up to your normie institution? We never want." And then it turned into actually we want what you've got. You give us everything you've got, and now we've got that with women who've gone from being peaceniks to and leading the whole peace movement to going, now I want to die in a war.
Yeah, exactly. I put this on Twitter.
I should have the right to die in a war.
Because I talked to my mum about it. My mum was a peace activist in the late 60s and 70s. And I said, you guys didn't burn your bras for the right to die in Vietnam.
In Hawaii,
you wanted to
throwing yourself on a grenade.
So when did we get to this point where we want women in combat? I mean, I've said this recently on a podcast. I don't think the policy is sincere because I don't think the policy can survive its first engagement. And, whoever you end up fighting the next global war with, the first FPV drone video of a woman begging for her life before being grenaded is going to put an end to that policy. No one wants to see that, right? No one wants that to happen. I mean, maybe
not except the Vietnamese. They're pretty tough. Those motherfuckers, man.
You look at the statistics on women in combat, right? And a lot of the countries that did deploy them did not deploy them in great numbers.
Yeah, like Russians had a lot of snipers, and they weren't like.
And also, there was it was used for a lot of propaganda purposes domestically. I mean, the Americans had. I read a lot about this in the last couple of weeks, and spoke to some friends of mine in the US about it. And there is a really interesting story about where all this came from, which was that back. I mean, as the American military kind of changed post-Cold War, they realized that they didn't have enough frontline soldiers. Because as things got more technical and you needed more people in the rear with the gear and more logistics and, more expertise.
Truck drivers.
And when you looked at the profile of the people who were joining the military, they realized, well, a lot of guys who could be on the front line with a rifle are actually, our technicians and mechanics and things like that. And so they were thinking about ways to, ensure that they could do everything they needed to do and provide people for the front line. And what they noticed is that it was from the United States Marine Corps, they noticed that retention of women in the Marines was higher than everywhere else. And they figured out a factor behind that is that every single Marine trains as a rifleman. So boot camp for a Marine, doesn't matter what job you're going to do, is exactly the same. Whether you're a cook or a cleaner or a Marine fighter pilot, you've had the exact same training experience and everyone is trained as a rifleman. That culture...
Is that Fort Bragg they do that?
I can't remember where it is. Bragg is the Special Forces one. I think Pensacola maybe is Marines. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But so they found that female retention in the Marines was high. They also found that men who ended up being put in rear echelon roles.
And why were the women? Because they just dug,
Well, yeah, because there was no feeling of there was a feeling of inequality because it was a big issue back in the 90s that if you didn't have combat ribbons, you weren't going to get promotions. So that was an issue. But apart from that, just the general culture of the place kind of benefited women. But they also found that men who are in these rear echelon roles were often there because they hadn't got the rating they wanted on application. And so what they would do is they would train as a mechanic, train as a technician, while improving their fitness level to then reapply for the job they really wanted, which was really, as far as the military was concerned, like a waste of 2 or 3 years of their time.
Yep.
If the guy was going to get half trained and then try and move, that was a problem. So what they figured out was that the more women you could get into the military, that they did the rear echelon roles better. They stayed in them for longer, which meant they got better at them, which meant it freed up more men to do the infantry roles that all the men wanted to do. And so they were trying to figure out a way to do that. And somewhere along the line, they got it into their heads that, well, look, if we just tell all the women they can do them, they can be on the front line, we can give them combat deployments, which they would end up doing in the early 2000s, that it would have this enormous benefit to recruitment. And it actually worked. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, you did actually see that transition in the US military.
Were there many women in Afghanistan?
Well, not so much in Afghanistan just because of the nature of it, but there were heaps in Iraq.
Really?
There were a lot of women deployed to Iraq.
And what happened? What was
most of them,
on morale?
They weren't in frontline combat roles. They were driving trucks. Okay. They were doing all these other roles. But it was great for the women involved because so many of them were able to then get on promotion pathways because they had combat ribbons, even though they never actually physically saw any combat. It almost, though, came to a head when there was that attack on a convoy, which had a female, I can't remember if she was Marine or Army, but she was a driver in 2004, and she was captured by the Iraqis, right? And that actually nearly brought the entire thing unstuck because no one wanted the optics of a woman being held in captivity by the Republican Guard having God knows what done to her. So you had that issue presented itself straight away.
Never mind the fact the Republican Guard, it wouldn't matter what, your
they probably
generals
did the
were.
blokes too. So the whole thing actually did work for women. And what they learned out of it was that, women don't really want to be in combat roles that much. Like they've had actually, since women have been eligible to be attempt to qualify for special forces in the United States, they've only had 6 and they've all been from the Air Force. So it's not like they're all rushing out to do this. But for the purposes of their morale and the purposes for retention and skill set of the military, it's really important to at least give them that option. But then, of course, what happens is in the mid-2000s, you have the Me Too movement. You have this shift in political culture. And suddenly it's, well, no, this isn't just something we're going to put to one side. This is something we're going to put up front and tell everyone, yeah, women in combat roles. Yeah, yeah. And then it becomes a huge issue because the men in those combat roles don't want women there. There's a lot of data to suggest that they're not as good at it as men. There's a lot of evidence that it negatively affects the morale of like unit cohesion for men. And men are the ones who are mostly doing it. So then and no one wants to see women getting chopped up in wars. So you just have this kind of like a well-intentioned policy that falls apart because of politics. It's fallen by the wayside in the US now because they've realised really no one wants to talk that much about it because no one really wants to go to war and have women dying. But Australians are stupid. And so now we have a situation where Anthony Albanese, Richard Marles, Peter Dutton, Hasty, everyone except that freak show Britain who got fired, everyone's coming out saying, oh, no, it's actually fine. And you're a misogynist if you doubt women in combat. When actually this is not a policy.
And if you look at Ukraine, there's a lot of like trench warfare going on there. Just, being physically bigger, is going to be a massive advantage. I remember going to the Imperial War Museum in 2014 and seeing the display of the Western Front trench hammers.
Oh, yeah,
German, like it was a display of German trench hammers. And if you want to see something to scare the living shit, and some of them had still had bits of meat on them. Like they were all like you imagine every type of perfectly crafted German warhammer. And I was thinking, imagine, some 6'3" Austrian meat axe coming at you like on this.
Have you ever read Ben Roberts-Smith's actual Victoria Cross citation?
No.
He was pulling dudes off his back and he was in close combat. And can a woman do that? It's extremely unlikely. The 6 women who qualified as special forces capable in the US were all tactical officers for the Air Force. So they're the ones who they do go in with the special forces, but they're kind of at the back, and their job is to get the binoculars and identify targets and bomb things from a distance. Are they going to go that well in a trench? It's just a bizarre hill to die on. As a human society has been ticking along fairly nicely for thousands of years without putting women in combat. No one has ever done it. You imagine the consequences if people had have done it. Imagine an alternative universe where we never had this resistance to women being in combat. Imagine what would have happened just in, say, the First World War, right? You're not going to get up to 25 million war dead and a demographic decline and say, wait, we should stop. Not if you've got another 25 million women you can just keep throwing into the meat grinder.
I would add a particular nasty dynamic to prisoner of war camps as well. Look at.
Although I was speaking to a US veteran about this, he made 2 really interesting points about women in combat, and he was actually one of the ones who told me about this kind of origin story of it. But he said that one of the most interesting recruitment pieces of data they noticed during the War on Terror was that the Abu Ghraib incident actually drove up female recruitment.
Really?
Yeah, because
they're
it's a
empowered.
woman,
Yeah,
right?
she's
It's one of the most iconic pictures in military history.
Yeah.
And who's holding the leash?
She's
It's
like
a chick.
She's
right?
like 5'4",
Yeah.
shaved head.
So he said, like, no one likes to talk about it. No one likes to talk about it. But the woman who's, you know, bravely survived captivity, all the female fighter pilots, like, no one drove recruitment, like seeing the woman holding the leash. But he said the other thing no one likes to talk about is the pregnancy rates. Like, putting aside, you know, sexual assaults on battlefields.
Yeah, group dynamics apply.
Just the pregnancy rates are insane.
I know.
Like 30 to 40%.
And imagine a hope of jarheads.
Yeah.
Like, you know, jacked up jarheads. You know, they've been in a camp for 6 months. You know, attractive. You know, like
I don't know. I've seen some of the Marine chicks. Like,
well, who knows?
it's very unflattering uniform.
But I'm always reminded, of Aliens. Remember in Aliens?
Oh yeah.
Vasquez.
Also,
and
the pilot
Hudson
was a chick as
Hudson
well.
goes, "Has anyone ever mistaken you for a man, Vasquez?" And she goes, "Don't know. Has anyone ever mistaken you?"
But you know, it's a classic trope in science fiction, though. It kind of always was, and it's
Rogue
one of those,
Trooper was it?
It's one of those worrying kind of those worrying trends about politics nowadays, which is like they do kind of forget what's fiction and reality. And so whether it's Starship Troopers or what was the Ron Halloran one? The one where they,
Starship Troopers, it was men and women.
the one where they go to space for ages and it takes them a while. Anyway, I can't remember what it was. Or Aliens or whatever. It's like you know, tough
Tank
chicks
Girl.
I mean, that's not real, right? Yeah. It's just like the British right now with their obsession with a Netflix show, Adolescence. And you do realize that's not a documentary.
Yeah.
How is that? How are people like putting this out there as a policy prescription when it's just a show? Like, imagine if the Americans were basing drug policy on Breaking Bad. I mean, I don't know. It's just one of those. That is one of those strange things where you worry that politics has gone so far down its own rabbit hole.
Breaking Bad, I reckon, is a lot closer to the truth.
Yeah, probably more close to the reality than many things.
Like a lot of people, a lot of mad high school chemists out there. Another defence thing that's come up in the election that was a curveball, again, one that Dutton could have made hay on, was the Russian base in Sulawesi. I love this one. Like the Russians, the Russians have been secretly planning to build a base. Where was it? Like,
it was actually, I think it was Denpasar. Like, it was pretty. It was.
Oh, really? It was it's in Java.
Yeah. It was pretty close to us.
I thought it was like on a secret island.
No, I don't think
on some atoll.
Well, they needed a fairly big facility for it. I can't remember exactly where it was, but I mean. It's interesting. Like it did happen insofar as the Russians really did make this approach.
It was in Jane, so like they're usually pretty tapped in.
But I mean, this was one of the funny things about the campaign, right? It's like they're so obsessed with the political angles on things. They don't stop to think about the reality, and they're all saying, "Oh, well, it's just Russian misinformation." Like, yeah, like Jane's as an organisation is bigger than the Australian intelligence community. They have more analysts in the Asia Pacific than we have actual spies. So the stuff you read in Jane's is probably better than the briefings you're getting from ASIO and ASIS, right? But the other thing is, like, all the journalists ran that story without reading the story. That was the craziest thing for me. Like, Jane's subscription costs $1,400 per year. Costs 3 times as much as the AFR. They charge that much for it because they're that good. They can afford to charge that much for it. No one was rushing out and buying those subscriptions. So it was 24 hours later when I can't remember if it was The Guardian or someone wrote a piece saying, like, kind of clarifying it, saying, because the lead says, you know, sources close to the Indonesian government say. And then the body of the story contained, like, well, we've also spoken to sources inside the Russian government. We've spoken to, like, all these different sources who've kind of confirmed that just the approach has been made, which was true. I mean, the Indonesians were never going to let it happen. That's just not what the Indonesians are like. Thankfully for us, we live next door to Indonesia, because they've always been, you know, fairly smart on these things, and they haven't indulged a lot of, like, the Chinese nation building that's gone on and things like that. The Russians
and like Subianto he's like he's a product of the West.
Well, he's Prabowo.
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
the new one?
Prabowo
Yeah.
Subianto. Yeah, yeah. He's like he went to
Yeah.
United States uni, I think military colleges.
He's a hard dude.
He's
too.
a hard dude. He's
yeah,
like
they don't mess around with
he's
these guys.
capacus.
Yeah, yeah. They
Like
don't mess around.
He's
No.
he's led like counterinsurgencies in West Papua, like involved in some I think some judicial executions.
200 actually. I was on a podcast with Drew Pavlou the other day, and he actually brought that up on screen when I was talking about him, and I did do some Indonesian genocide denial at the time, which I've now done some research and worked on myself, and I know that yes, there were 200 deaths in that particular incident. But yeah, he's a pretty serious guy. Yeah.
And the Indonesians are very staunch, but they're just about controlling Indonesia because it's actually about 15 different countries, and
Indonesia's a great country.
It's a fantastic country.
When they say Australia is a lucky country, one of the things we think it's about, our mineral wealth and the weather and whatever. But I mean, you think about where we are geographically located and who our neighbours are. You could not have a better neighbour than Indonesia. You've got this; it's the world's largest Muslim majority country, and yet they've decided instead of going with Sharia law or an insane caliphate, they said, "Oh, we're going to come up with our own kind of constitution." I mean, these guys swear allegiance to the Unitary Republic of Indonesia before God. And that's the way the Indonesian military works.
It goes their political party, their mosque, and then their football. Their football team. People don't understand about Indonesia how fucking crazy they are about football. I reckon the best way, I'm just going to a little side hustle here, is I reckon the best way Australia could integrate and engage with Indonesia is have two football teams. You heard it here first from Indonesia playing in the A-League.
I like that actually.
You imagine, there was a weekly game like Perth Glory versus the Jakarta
That's a good
Bulls.
idea. You know what else they love? Metal.
They love metal.
Indonesia. I've been to Indonesian metal bars. They are a sight to behold.
In East Java, Malang, there's the metal is everywhere.
And also they don't have a lot of the kind of cultural issues with certain German symbologies as well. They wear the uniform with no problem wearing it.
There's no PC there. I mean, but they're a staunch country. I mean, and if you look back at it, the way that Sukarno, putting down the was it Sukarno put down the communists?
Suharto put down the communists.
So Suharto
out of helicopters.
The whole
harsh.
The whole thing.
We helped with that, I think.
I know. And then just carved
we just
up.
pretended we would just stop talking about it afterwards. And badly as well. And now it was shortly after the Russian thing happened. The Timorese are now talking.
Who are they
about,
dancing with? They're is it? It's not China, is it?
It's China,
China.
The Timorese are cuddling up to China.
On the basis of that, I don't know if you read this, Clive Hamilton, right? He's a real xenophobe, started the Australian Institute. He wrote a piece last week saying we must get nukes immediately.
Oh, yeah, these guys are insane about it. Yeah.
They're insane. Yeah. This guy is as hard left in Australia as you can he started the Australian Institute. He said, seriously said, China will attack Taiwan in 2027. Yeah. No doubt. It's already locked in. We must go and get nukes immediately.
It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous concept. I mean, people don't often know this about me because I am extremely right-wing, but I'm also an insane pacifist. And I am dead against Australia having nuclear weapons for the simple reason that when you look at the models, the fallout models from nuclear Armageddon, which, people have been modeling for the last 30, 40 years as improvements in thermonuclear weapon design have happened. When you look at those models, one of the only places in the world that has a chance of surviving nuclear war is the southern part of Australia, New Zealand,
Albany,
Chile, parts of Argentina. As you go around the world, it's really only the most south of the southern hemisphere that has any chance of being able to grow anything out of the ground for 50 years after this happens. Now, if South Africa doesn't have nuclear weapons. They tried to get them. They don't have them anymore. No one in Latin America does. Should Australia have that capability, war planners in whether it's Russia or China or, God forbid, the United States, are just going to draw a big X on the map. And so that fallout model is not going to look as favourable for Australia anymore because it's only going to take one or two. I mean, we could live with one in Pine Gap.
Yeah.
But we can't live with one further to the south. We're going to end up, you're going to end up with the same consequences as the rest of the planet.
And see, that's what the States has got. Like the States has got this incredibly diverse and a dispersed population, and their military installations are all out in the middle of nowhere. Their entire I didn't know this about the States. Their entire interstate road network is designed to also be runways.
Yeah.
It has to be
It's same in a lot of Eastern Europe as well.
Every 10 Ks has got to operate as a runway. It's got to be flat and as accessible, and that's why
in Ukraine they designed the roads to be able to have tanks drive two abreast. So it's weird, though. The roads are unusually wide because the roads weren't designed for cars. The roads were designed for tanks.
It's like when you get the Bathurst, you go, why are the roads? Because they used to
I know the spot up where the hotel is.
They have to turn like a massive team.
I did actually read that Clive thing. I get enormously frustrated with the regular, it always works one of two ways with these people. It's either people saying, oh, we either need nuclear weapons, or we need an Iron Dome, or we need some kind of rail gun system or something to defend ourselves from the Chinese, or it's these people on the other side who say, oh, well, we could never defend ourselves from the Chinese. Yeah. When the truth is pretty squarely in the middle, which is that the thing that will defend us from the Chinese or the Indonesians or whoever it decides to invade. I mean, North Korea still has the third largest army in the world.
Yeah.
Right? Who knows what the North Koreans are going to do? And if you go back through all the old defense white papers, I have problems, and so I've read every single defense white paper since about 2001, and actually a few from before. And when you go through them, they never actually identify the country. They only just call it a red team or whatever. It changes quite a bit, and yeah, sure, we can't last that long in a even hot war. But you know what? No one else can do is cross the country. Geography is our biggest ally. Right?
The Brisbane line. It still applies, doesn't it? You just don't defend
we
it.
Have
I'm sorry if you're in Cairns.
Australia has 72 F-35s based
and they're nuclear capable.
They are, yeah. But the most important thing we have, so we've got 72 F-35s, some in Tyndall, some in Williamtown. Now, notice there's none on the West Coast, right? Because from the West Coast, they would be...
Is Tyndall Catherine?
Tyndall is Queensland.
Is it? Right.
So anyone coming down the East Coast to invade our major capital cities, we've got 72 of those. We've got 200 AGM-84 harpoons. We can put them all in the air. You can't stop them. You can't find them. And there's not much a ship can do about a harpoon coming right at it. And how many do you really need to sink? I mean, China has 770 literal combat ships. They're not going to send all 770 down here. No, they'd be lucky to send 20, and we could sink them all.
And if they're invading Australia, what else have they got on there?
Yeah, I imagine there might be some other stuff going on.
I know.
That point.
And we might have had the tip, satellites. So they're loading up, their aircraft carriers, and off they come. And we could just borrow one nuke and just nuke them out in the Pacific.
We don't even need to do that. We just need to wait. If you go up to the top end, right, you look at the distances involved. I mean, did you know this? I looked this up the other day. The top 3 land invasions by border area, right? So number 1 is actually Operation Barbarossa.
Really?
Right? So when the Germans invaded the Soviet Union from the point in the north of Finland to the south, one of the largest land invasions that had ever been undertaken. Number 2 is
it went all the way
down, right? Now number 2 is Attila the Hun, because Attila the Hun was half of that. Number 3 is Russia in 2022.
Yeah.
Now none of those you're getting above 500 kilometers. These are 500-kilometer long lines. Now, it's 500 kilometers just from Exmouth to Darwin in a straight line. Now, what's that in along the actual coast?
Yeah.
Probably looking at about 1,500 kilometers worth of coastline that you can make landfall on. And, one of the best...
With no water. And it's not like you're pillaging the countryside.
One of the funniest things about, all these strategic arguments people have is they all say, Australia needs a strategic fuel reserve. I'm like, no, we don't. Because... the first thing the strategic fuel reserve is going to be is looted by the invaders. If someone lands in Australia under arms, there's no fuel. We just have to turn off the derricks on our way. We just have to evacuate everyone in the top end and leave it. And so there's only 250,000 people up there.
And just,
and just say, good luck.
Repurpose all the racehorses.
We'll see you in Brisbane.
Let's go back
see
to
how well they do. And can you imagine the condition of the Chinese military by the time they finally made it to Brisbane after walking?
Yeah.
Like there's just no way anyone's going to undertake it. Australia is not a country you can logically invade.
And also, what are they going to do? They've got a blue water navy. They come down through and they just like sail through Indonesia. Going, hold on, hold on, don't worry about us.
This all assumes that the Indonesians won't try and stop them.
I know, exactly. We are just passing through. And what are you doing on your way to,
and
like conquering?
what the Ukrainian war has taught us is that so long as someone from the shore can see your ships, those ships can be sunk, right? It's a totally new rubric that wasn't there before. People used to think you could have gunboat diplomacy. You could just sail these things around. But if you can see them, you can blow them up.
And you said this last time, the Chinese aren't great at dying in mass numbers. I had a look at it. And so I went back and had a look at it. Last time China invaded another country, Vietnam, 1979. They invaded, as abysmal as this is, they invaded to stop the Vietnamese invading Cambodia or getting rid of Kampuchea to get rid of.
I always thought it was Kombucha. I've always been pronouncing that wrong.
Really?
I thought that's where kombucha came from.
It probably did. It's probably some left-wing mind-altering substance.
Yeah.
It's just vinegar.
Is it?
Yeah, it's just vinegar.
It's gross.
It's just vinegar, and it can get you pissed. It's about 1%.
I have seen that.
So if you give it to kids, they go, woo!
It was really big a few years back. Everyone was doing it for like their gut health and stuff.
Gut health, but it actually, gives you massive ulcers.
Yeah, right.
But the Chinese, and in 1 month, the Chinese lost 50,000. The Vietnamese, the same. They really went hard at each other in 1979. But the Chinese went, we've achieved our strategic objective, which they didn't at all.
Yeah.
They were trying to take Hanoi, and then they just bailed out because
they can't really take that many casualties, and it's because they don't have that many men. Like they have a lot of men, like they've got what their reserve forces, like 100 million or something. But the legacy of the one-child policy is that more often than not, they're that family's only male child. So how many only male childs come home in body bags before you have the same situation in China that you had in the United States during the global war on terror, which, the casualties in Guat weren't really that high. Like, it's just that to the Americans, one private Marine coming home dead in one town meant a lot.
Especially because they made a massive deal out of it.
Yeah, they made a massive deal out of it. Right?
They get the flag, the convoy, the whole thing.
I mean, I think they're going to have serious problems. I mean, I don't think there's any risk of China ever doing a land invasion. The risk of whether it's China or Russia or whoever wants to mess with us is going to be the pre-2014 Ukraine scenario where, like, Russia initially had no intention of invading Ukraine. Russia's intention with Ukraine was to replace all their political leadership with their own assets. And by 2014, they'd successfully done that. Viktor Yanukovych was Russia's man inside the Duma. And which one's the Ukrainian one? Yeah, he was their man in Kiev. And when the Ukrainians figured that out, they had a revolution. Now, the challenge is in Australia, if Beijing put their man in, the lodge, would we notice? We're pretty used to these guys being useless, right? So that's the risk. The risk is not red dawn and one day we wake up and there's like red parachutes dropping over Sydney Harbour. The risk is one day you wake up and China is just literally occupying Canberra.
Yeah.
And, I think that's the only thing worth worrying about. And the thing is, we're up for grabs. It might not be China. It could be anyone. I mean, it doesn't even have to be a superpower, really. I mean, India's doing a pretty good job of it right now. I mean, how many announcements about, India have there been just during this campaign? There's like a 40-foot gold statue of Shiva in Parramatta right now, right? So, it's not just the old superpowers that we have to worry about because, Australia has so little natural resilience to these things.
So soft power.
We're just up
everywhere.
for grabs.
And if someone turns up, I'm here to help and I'm going to help you do your thing.
Yeah.
And by the way, now I'm in charge and thank you. Now you can help me do my thing. I think your best take in the whole Twitter was just how bad, really, really bad, like your Twitter stream, which you've got to check out, John Macgowan's Twitter, which is excellent, was just how bad that photo of Albo at the Golden Century was. Oh my God, what has happened to us? Like, you've got to have where's the Les Patterson? Like, where, no Tsingtao, no Durries, no hangover.
This is what I know why this doesn't happen. I know the scientific reason behind
But
it.
you want to, like, if you want to appeal to people, make it
Yeah.
look like you've had a
if you're
feed.
if
not
you're
just-
running a campaign, it doesn't matter if you're here in Australia or anywhere around the world. If you're a campaign manager right now with the current electorate, you're looking for opportunities for authenticity.
Yeah.
Every single day. You want to expose your candidate to these moments where the public can see who they really are, even if it's not even necessarily great.
Yeah.
As long as they see
Fall
the real
over, you
raw
know.
shit,
Spill
it
some
works.
sauce on
I mean,
you.
this is why Biden survived for as long as he did, because there's
Yeah.
nothing more authentic than a man struggling with Alzheimer's.
Yeah, or dying in
Yeah,
public.
just
You
dying
just
in
go-
public. Yeah.
It's like, holy
Right? He
shit.
was like, well, one thing you can say about Biden is he's probably not going to be able to lie to you.
Yeah, but it's like,
But that was stuff like that is such a great opportunity. Like, you know, sit down, have a nice meal, get a photo taken at the end of it. But that looked like, I could tell that a staffer had arranged that table. It
Yeah.
looked like, you know, something a real estate agent would put together.
yeah.
Like, you know,
And someone's just taken some of the food off.
yeah, and it was all the unhealthy food was left
Yeah.
behind. Like, look
Yeah.
at us, we're watching our weight, not a single beer.
Yeah.
It was just so deeply weird.
I
Like,
know.
stuff like that I find bizarre.
Do you
because-
think there'll ever be a place again for like fat real people in politics? You know,
Well, I mean-
politics used to be dominated by, and I think enriched by people who looked, you know, like they were smart but you
Yeah.
know unhealthy.
the major parties
But now
have
it's now it's like we would rather have a triathlete, like what's his
a
name?
boring triathlete
like
who can read,
Farmer.
who reads off a
Yeah, what's his that-
Pat Farmer.
Pat
Yeah, yeah.
Farmer.
But I mean, Pat Farmer is a great example of just a real authentic guy. Like, he was a genuine guy. Pat Farmer's one of the like most bizarre and funny and also sad political stories of like Australian political history. Like, his wife died and he got sad and he went for a 9,000 kilometre run.
Forrest Gump.
And
Just
then halfway
100%.
through, John Howard sees him on TV and goes, I want that guy to run for Campbelltown. And
I know.
he was so funny.
Are we going to
Like,
have those like Ned Brockman, another one?
No,
you
you
know,
just can't have them anymore. Because the thing with Pat was Pat had like, he was a real guy who had real guy problems. So I worked on Pat's 2004 campaign.
I bet you did.
Remember Pat had that crazy moment where he moved and he decided that he didn't want to live in Campbelltown anymore. And so he moved to the North Shore. And his justification was, I'm coming against the traffic now, so I can actually get to my electorate quicker by living in the North Shore. I worked for him before that period. But they sent me to his electorate office. This is like early in 2004. And I got in there and the cleaner was cleaning and I let myself in. There was no one around. I was looking around going, where the hell's Pat? And the campaign had started. And I just sat around the office all day. And back then, like, we didn't have, like, we had mobile phones, but not everyone used them. His phone in his office started ringing. And I was like, oh, I guess I better answer it. And it was fucking Tony Nutt, who at the time, he wasn't the federal director then. He was like Howard's private secretary. And
Notoriously.
one of the most
Frightening.
terrifying men in Australian politics, one of the few men I can honestly say I was genuinely intimidated by. And so this is like 2004. So I'm like 22 maybe. And I'm in Pat's office and I've answered the phone and it's Tony Nutt and he's going, where the fuck is Pat Farmer? And I'm like, I don't know. I got
Gone
here.
for a run.
There's no one here.
He's in Alice Springs.
It turned out Pat had left to go to Singapore after the election had been called to get back with his missus, and he had just left and he hadn't told anyone. And he was gone.
No.
And they said, well, you've got to find him. And I was like, oh, and they're like, well, you're dead if you don't find him. Like, we'll fire you. Bye. And then just hung up. I sat, because there's no like internet then really. Well, there was the internet, but it didn't work very well. I had to go to a library and find a Singaporean phone book, which was already out of date, and start calling hotels and saying, is Pat Farmer there? Is Pat Farmer there? Until I found him.
No.
I eventually found him.
Fuck,
Yeah.
that's old school.
Man, that was what it was like in the early 2000s. Like,
Wow.
yeah. And he came, and then he still didn't come back. Like, he came back like 2 weeks, I think a week or so later. And his staff all knew. His staff then filtered back into the office. They're like, yeah, Pat does this all the time. And then finally he arrived just in time to do the appearance with John Howard. Because John loved Pat Farmer. Because he was like a real guy. He was a sporting hero. He had this great story. I mean, yeah, you're not going to find guys like that anymore. Because nowadays, if you're the kind of guy who's going to piss off at the beginning of the campaign because your missus is more important to you, and so you're going to go to Singapore to get back with her, you're not going to get. major party pre-selection. Like,
Well, and that's why I think I think that's something that major parties have to wake up to. Like now, like pretty much like most of Gen Z, the only person they really want to tune into in terms of this election camp is Bob Catter. They just want
everyone loves Catter,
They
right?
just, they just
But that's what I mean. Authenticity.
They
right?
want-
He's an authentic guy. There's just people are just desperate for it. They're like starving for it. You know, they want like normal people saying normal things, and it's really specific too. If you can drill into it, it's that it's a way of speaking. I think that they don't get, because there is this political way of speaking, like the political voice that they all have, and so.
And the jargon, like going forward, and that they incorporate like all these.
I'd done it before in a genuinely scientific setting, but I did it just as a joke on Twitter during one of the debates, which is just you go into ChatGPT and as they ask the questions, just type them in and say, answer this like Anthony Albanese, answer this like Peter Dutton. And then you look at the ChatGPT result and look at what they say and compare them. And they're like word for word.
Oh my
sometimes.
God.
Like if you can be impersonated by an AI with that level of fidelity, you have a serious problem. When I did it back when we're up to like ChatGPT 4 now. So this was like pre-3. This is a very early release of ChatGPT where I took whole day Hansards and got ChatGPT to generate them for me based on using like the notices of motions and things as prompts to like effectively populate a Hansard, and then we pulled together I think in the end there were like 3 focus groups of 12 people and tried to get them to identify which one was the AI and which one was the human. And of course, people's understanding of AI at that point was not as advanced as it is now. And we found overwhelmingly that people believed that the AI was the human.
Oh.
Because the AIs were trained to produce text that was kind of conversational and kind of organic. But that's not how they talk. In real life, they talk like these robots. And so eventually I figured out how to, there's actually a temperature setting on a lot of the AIs you can manually turn down by talking to them. It's called a top P setting. And so you could adjust it. You could say like, respond to this with a top P setting of X. And we eventually figured out that you had to turn the AI's temperature down to like the point of like, have you seen Interstellar with the robot? Like cut, like, okay, do that, Dave. Like you had to get it like right down to that level before people would look at the results and say, okay, yeah, that's an AI versus a human. They just assumed that a human would be a bit more, exuberant about what they were doing.
Or thoughtful, like they're actually. It wasn't something they're remembering; they're actually thinking. I remember Bob Brown. He was always like that. He'd get asked a question. He'd get about like 3 words into it, or like a sentence into it, and then the tism or something would kick in, and he would then you'd see him look to the side, get wistful, and then come up with some mysticism.
That's
And
so
you'd
great
just
when
go,
people do that.
and you'd go, oh.
But that's an interesting,
and he'd nail it.
But that's an interesting question, right? I ask everyone this, which is like, when was the last time you watched an Australian politician and felt like, that little bit of frisson? Like, I can never pronounce that word. I know how to spell it, but I can't pronounce it. Like, you get like a fucking creep up your spine listening to one of these guys. When has one of them ever made you genuinely feel anything? And I mean, I can't even remember one. Like, I mean, I've had some personal moments in politics where I was like genuinely emotional about things. Like when we won in 2013, that was pretty impressive. I remember watching Abbott that night thinking, wow, that was pretty cool. I mean, the last state election was pretty good for I was impressed when Gladys won that with the landslide she did. But I mean, just like incidental speeches and things that make you stop and, hold your breath. Like when was the last time you ever saw that? These things were stock and trade for politicians. That was their whole job. Like the American political class through the 1950s, 60s, 70s into the early 80s, really until Reagan, was essentially about taking people who were charming and could do that. Like who could hold the attention of a crowd. People like John F. Kennedy, who could give a speech that everyone would hang off every word of. Today, you don't hang off every word of these people's speeches, if you even listen to them, which no one does. I mean, this was the genius of Donald Trump, right? Because Trump just doesn't give speeches. He just gives a series of stand-up bits. and you walk away and you remember some of the one-liners, you remember some of the zingers. It works for him. But even he doesn't do it. But Trump, I think, has that ability that so many comedians do, that if he ever turns that off and becomes serious, he will give one of the best speeches in political history.
Yeah.
Right? It's like
Ricky Gervais. Like when he actually sort of gets a bit mean and serious, or Dave Chappelle or someone like that, you go, oh, hold on.
The example I always use is,
I was thinking about it like when you were saying it, and I was thinking, I don't really get it from the political class anymore. It's mainly, stand-up comedians. When they get a little bit political, or they say something.
Yeah, like what are the best speeches that have been given? And I mean, increasingly now, it's like, well, what are the best podcast appearances you've seen? Like, it's sad. It's like legitimately sad that we just don't have politicians who are capable of doing that anymore. And also strange that it should be such an obvious thing that if you want to be successful in politics, go find someone who's charming and attractive and that can give a speech. Like, if you can't tick those boxes right out of the gate, like, what are you even doing? Like, why are you bothering?
Well, I think it comes from a time when actually people gave a fuck what happened in parliaments. Yeah. And you had, if you could control, if you could win a parliament, you could do something that actually sort of mattered. You had parliaments that were doing things that I think were far more consequential, and having a great orator, really made a difference.
This is why you guys are lucky in New South Wales Parliament, because it is one of the last places where you still have that. You have had that in recent history. I mean, there are really good speakers in there. It's sad because so many of them are just wasted on it. Like, I tune into the upper house occasionally, and I am still to this day impressed by how good some of those guys are.
There are some good ones. I mean, I'll tell you a really good one is Bob Nanva. He's a good guy. Like, he doesn't get up much, but when he does,
But he was a big union leader, right?
Yeah, he was a union leader, and he's got a great backstory. But when he gives a cracking speech, it's really good.
Yeah, some of them could do that. I mean,
yeah, he's pretty good. He really.
And remember when you first started, we had like Peter Phelps in there. Phelpsy would do great. You should get Phelpsy on the show.
I've tried to. He's in hiding. I don't know what he's doing.
That's sad.
Yeah, I know.
I'll work on him.
Can you work on him? Because he's gold. Like, he's absolute gold, mate. And he's just he's an amazing guy. Knows so much shit about everything. And used to just give the most eviscerate people. Really good.
But like he had his own, and this is I think one of the biggest problems with politics is Phelps. He had his own fully formed political ideology.
Yeah,
like he didn't come in with his political ideology just being what's written on the back of the Liberal Party membership form. Like, it wasn't all like enterprise and initiative. He thought about things. He was literate. He was intellectual. He disagreed with the Liberal Party on a lot of stuff.
He had like a real wit too. He was very sardonic.
Yeah.
It's I always used to say self-depreciating, but self-deprecating wit
and legitimately funny.
Yeah,
like, he would actually make people laugh in the chamber.
His video on his speech, which we will try and dig up on fist fucking. I mean, that's one of
I remember that. He's the first person to say it in Parliament.
I think in the world.
in any Parliament ever. First one to bring it up.
I think anyone like in public life. Well, he was pretty funny there.
He was good value. But I mean, like, he didn't even bother running for pre-selection last time. And he never said it. I think we all just knew it. But like, he wasn't going to get pre-selected.
No.
I really don't think he could have.
I remember doing the maths on the ethanol issue and just going, you know what?
Yeah.
Like, do the maths here. This is the stupidest piece.
He hated it.
He hated it.
But why were we doing it? I mean, I can say this now. I certainly couldn't say it at the time. We were doing it because the guy was a Liberal Party donor. Like, what was his name? The ethanol Manildra guy.
Yeah.
He was one of the biggest donors to the party. And it died in a ditch for the guy.
I know. And it was 10% of fuck all.
Yeah.
The ethanol mandate, and I remember,
it was bizarre.
And he was a really interesting cat for sure.
Yeah.
Look, we've got you on, John, and we've talked politics. Now let's talk about the really interesting thing. I want to talk about conspiracies. I want to talk about the occult because. Like, you are a necromancer.
It is
when you're not like a political consultant.
I do raise people's careers from the dead.
You do.
I also do put some of them in the ground.
You do magic. But you've got an iceberg on your Twitter again.
Oh, yeah, which got mentioned in Parliament.
Yes, exactly, of political conspiracies. Look, let's start at the top because we've had the JFK files.
Yeah,
released.
which is really interesting.
Which is it?
Hugely
Is it interesting? Like,
it is interesting.
Is there new shit, or like, has Congress already coughed up most of it? Because
So I read it all. Look, it's 80,000 pages. Probably like 60 to 70% of it is just irrelevant because what it is, it's all these documents that were redacted during the Church Commission, the Senate Select Committee into assassinations, and the Warren Commission.
Warren Commission,
right? So it's all these.
Warren Commission was in the 60s. The other ones were sort of in the 70s, weren't they?
Yeah, they were later. Now, so these were documents that had originally had significant redactions. And so a big chunk of the 80,000 are just like, I mean, not email chains because these are literally just, these are papers that were sent around by hand. These are conversations between intelligence officials and senior bureaucrats deciding whether or not to redact or unredact them. And Australia is in there too. So there's actually correspondence between ASIS and the CIA concerning a really interesting episode where a Polish national showed up to an embassy and said that JFK is going to be assassinated tomorrow and later on they're going to kill MLK and RFK. And they wrote it all down and filed it. And Australia's intelligence people contacted the Americans and said, hey.
A Polish guy at an Australian embassy.
Yeah. And
right.
Actually, no, he showed up to the UK embassy and then he spoke, I think, on the phone to the Australians. And he said all this stuff. And so there was the argument over whether or not to redact it. Now, the Australians sent a very curt letter back to the Americans saying, and this is in like the late 1960s, saying under no circumstances redacted, which was for a fairly legitimate reason, which was because we didn't admit to the existence of our secret intelligence agency then. So there's stuff like that. There's just a lot of email, like message chains where they're saying, do we redact this or don't we redact this? In terms of what actually was unredacted, it does a bunch of interesting things. There's no document that just says these guys killed him, right? There's no document that says that. It does put to bed some of the theories. So it immediately puts to bed a kind of fringe theory that like it was the mafia that killed him, because there's unredacted documents concerning a guy called David Ferry, who was a key member of what's called like the Louisiana Circle that Jim Garrison investigated. And he was the one who had connections with the Chicago mob. And it kind of goes through his role in it, and then you can kind of see, well, yeah, like it's not like the mafia ever really knew about this or had any other involvement apart from him.
Because hadn't Bobby Kennedy pissed the mafia off?
Yes, so that was one theory. So out of all the
how did he piss them off? He said
just by investigating them.
Yeah, like
pre-RICO. But
yeah,
like
he was going after Vegas.
Yeah. So he had, which has been like in all the gangster movies and stuff over the years, and some of the books. So like the Kennedys had this problem with the mob. Which was a problem for the CIA because the mob and the CIA had a really close relationship out the back of the Second World War. So
when they armed the Sicilians, when they gave them like shitloads of shotguns when they were invading Sicily.
It was a problem when you had the Attorney General and later the President with one view on the mob and the intelligence agency having another view. So there was one theory that the mob did it. Now, I think those documents kind of close out the question of the mob doing it. The other theory that had been floating around for about 20 years, but had really only come to prominence in the last 2 or so years because of current events, was the whole theory that Israel were behind it.
No.
And the basis, who would have thought that Israel would do nefarious intelligence? Israel assassinating someone? That's crazy.
Pretty ballsy though.
But yeah, so this kind of comes, and it first kind of rears its head in the 90s in the wake of like the release of some of the Church Committee documents and the release of Oliver Stone's JFK. This theory that Israel did it, and the basis for Israel doing it was that JFK didn't want them to have nuclear weapons, and that JFK was working on a plan to stop them from acquiring them. There was a document in the Church Committee where James Angleton, who was the head of counterintelligence for the CIA, it had all been redacted, and it was rumored that that was him talking about the Israel connection. Now, it turns out the unredacted document isn't him talking about the Israel connection. It's him admitting, though, that he was a major source for Israeli intelligence, and he was sharing intelligence with Israel, and they were sharing intelligence with him. But there's another document that got unredacted, which was from 1961, which is a briefing document about Israel's nuclear weapons program. And it reveals that at the time of the assassination, Israel already had the bomb. So there's no way. I mean, well, there's not no way, but I mean, what's the why would Israel kill the US president to make sure they get a nuclear bomb that they already have? Like, it doesn't really make that much sense. Like, that whole kind of theory falls apart. The only kind of what the documents do kind of show is they're very similar actually to what happened with the 9/11 Commission report, where like there's no smoking guns in there, but it just shows like a string of a cover up after the fact to obscure that they probably knew that stuff was going to happen, and that they knew that people knew that they knew, and they had to cover it up. The most likely scenario at the back of all these documents is still the one Jim Garrison put forward during the trial of Clay Shaw, which is that a rogue CIA Operation Mongoose, of all these anti-Castro militants plotted to kill Kennedy, and they may have used Lee Harvey Oswald as a patsy, and that whether or not Oswald ever pulled the trigger is in doubt. There's some really interesting stuff that got unredacted over Oswald's actions in the last 24 hours before the assassination that have always been hinted at but have never been confirmed. Like, for example, that he drove to New Mexico and entered the Soviet and Cuban consulates in New Mexico and spoke to consular officials and then drove back to Dallas. Now, one of the most interesting things about that in the new documents is that both the Soviet and Cuban consulates were under surveillance by the CIA, but they lost the tapes.
Oh,
so
handy.
Yeah, because you'd think, that's something you're going to lose in the decade after the assassinate, like a world-changing assassination.
So they're essentially saying an anti-Cuban.
They were anti-Castro militants. Operation Mongoose was started by the CIA to arm Castro militants. It was spread around, but like the most of its membership was in Louisiana.
But why kill Kennedy then? Because Kennedy was...
Well, there was point one, the Bay of Pigs fiasco, where, most of these guys had died. They attempted the Bay of Pigs invasion. It had failed.
And then he pulled back from...
Then he massively pulled back from it. I mean, so that's kind of the motive. The opportunity was that they all knew that he was going to Dallas. And these guys are all psychopaths as well. Like, these were bad dudes. I mean,
I've stood at the book repository in Dallas. You can stand there. You just go into the museum.
Yeah.
You can stand there and you can lean out the window
and see if you can take the shot.
Yeah. And it's a hard shot. It is a hard shot. It is like the car's going downhill and away. Him plugging that guy with 2 bullets in.
So the question then becomes like, did he take the shot anyway? Like. And also, like, what was he a double agent for the Russians? Was he a triple agent for the Cubans? Was he originally working for the CIA? Like, Oswald's entry into the Soviet Union is crazy. Like, that whole piece of history is just bizarre. How he quits the Marines, he enters the Soviet Union as a tourist, and then he walks into the Soviet, into the consulate and hands over his passport and says, I want to become a Soviet citizen. They let him do it, and then they let him come back with his wife. Like, something happened. Something happened over there with Oswald.
Not everyone did that in
I don't think
1959.
anyone ever did that, right? So the whole thing with him was just bizarre. Look, I personally think, having read a lot of this stuff over the years, that Garrison's theory was a correct one. That the conspiracy was a rogue CIA operation. The question then becomes, to what extent did the CIA ever know about it? To what extent did they ever take steps to stop it? And, that's what you do kind of get. You certainly see a motive emerge in the new documents where the extent of their domestic spying operation was so big. Like, I mean, Clay Shaw, who was the guy that Garrison charged with the conspiracy to assassinate Kennedy, Shaw denied to his deathbed that he was ever a CIA agent. Richard Helms would later admit in 1979, just like a throwaway line, that he said, we believe he may have had some involvement with the CIA. These documents make it clear he was a fully vetted external operative of the CIA. He was helping to fund militancy by anti-Castro forces, both in Louisiana and in Cuba itself. Like, that's all laid out there, right? That's really the only theory that makes sense.
What about the theory that the Bushes were behind it? That they, they massive oil interests. They were hoping that we would have another.
But so it doesn't quite sync up with George W. Bush's time in the CIA. So he was extremely junior when this happened. So that one doesn't come. Look, they've come up with all kinds of stories for it. One thing that I think is really clear that the Americans do, and there's actually a really interesting part of the new documents that makes it very clear this is the case, is that when they are trying to cover something up, they deliberately spread misinformation about wackier conspiracies to make it seem like if you believe in the very likely conspiracy, then you also agree with all the crazy people. So you take, for example, there's a guy called Dr. Stephen Greer, who's one of those UFO guys who's obsessed with there's demonic aliens underneath Area 51 and whatever. He produced a document in the late 1990s. He never showed the document to anyone, but he's claimed to have it, which was said to be a transcript of a telephone conversation by Marilyn Monroe, where she said that they killed Kennedy because he told her about the aliens. This is a real thing. This is Stephen Greer said it was a real thing. And no one's ever really believed it, right? But it becomes this thing where if you believe Jim Garrison's story, then they can tar you with the brush that, do you believe that they killed Marilyn Monroe over the aliens? What's really interesting in these new documents.
I thought they killed Marilyn Monroe over the sex parties.
Well, yeah, who knows?
Bobby,
yeah, I mean, that's a fascinating piece of conspiracy law. But there's a famous document in ufology called the Majestic 12 document. And
I've never heard of it.
So this was found. This was found in the late 1970s, and it was purported by UFO researchers to be a secret briefing note by this shadowy cabal of 12 men under the Eisenhower administration who were aware of the existence of UFOs and aliens, had cut deals with them, that had flying saucers underneath Area 51, all this stuff. The reason everyone knows about this document is because it was handed into the FBI. Someone found it and said, this is weird, gave it to the FBI, and the FBI investigated it. If you Google Majestic 12 document and look it up on Google and go to the FBI website where it is freely available in the FBI archives, someone has actually written bogus across the front of it because the FBI investigated this and said, look, this document just isn't real. There's all these signs that it's been doctored or whatever. Anyway, there's a weird coincidence or just a weird connection that in one of the men of the Majestic 12 who were on this panel of people who knew about the existence of aliens, one of their code names, which I think was SJ12 on the original Majestic 12 document, he appears just in his regular job as a CIA assistant director in these new documents, but with the same code name that was already redacted. So whoever compiled the Majestic 12 document knew this senior CIA officer's code name, and when forging the Majestic 12 document was able to put it on there. And the implication being, I mean, unless you believe that it's real and that they really did know about aliens, but the implication is that document was forged by someone with a Q clearance inside the CIA. And I think that's what comes out of a lot of this stuff, is that when the Americans are about to be caught out on something, they come up with an insane conspiracy theory. Right? The 9/11 Commission report, it feels like no one's ever read it. If you ever sit down and read the entire 9/11 Commission report, it is a story of gross incompetence and oversight by US intelligence agencies, right? That they should have known about 9/11 in advance, that they did in fact know that many of these individuals had traveled into the United States. But you know what also comes out in the wake of the 9/11 Commission report? Those videos on YouTube saying that jet fuel can't melt steel beams and 9/11 is an inside job, right? So if you take the 9/11 Commission report and you attempt to say publicly, hey, there's a serious issue here, there's been a cover-up by US authorities
of their incompetence,
to mask their incompetence, to mask the fact that they either should have known about it or did know about it and do nothing, well, you're tarred with the same brush to the people who think jet fuel can't melt steel beams. And there's every single time one of these things happens throughout history, this is what the Americans do. And they certainly did it with JFK. If you look at the history from the Warren Commission through the Senate Select Committee into assassinations to the Church Commission through to when Oliver Stone makes JFK, you see every time the American public gets a kind of idea that maybe something went wrong, a more ridiculous conspiracy theory comes out. So that a lot of the craziest JFK conspiracy theories that are out there, they actually got seeded in the direct wake of Oliver Stone's movie, which is the most sane of all the conspiracy theories, right? And this happens over and over again. It's like with QAnon and Epstein, right? Jeffrey Epstein really did traffic children. Jeffrey Epstein really does have deep links into global finance and intelligence
And some
agencies,
pretty
right?
powerful mates.
But there's no tunnels underneath.
There's no pizza shop.
Well, there was. The pizza shop's interesting. I mean, I think the pizza shop is really interesting. But, you know, every time one of these things happens that you should ask questions about, this counter narrative comes out to make you look like a lunatic. I mean, I think one of the most interesting examples of that is the moon landing hoax.
Well, before you get to the moon landing, what do you reckon the chances are with 9/11 they knew and just went like...
I think 100%.
Yeah.
And I think there's a really...
Like, wait, hold on. What about the theory like that they had to be demolished anyway, you know, full of asbestos?
Well,
you know?
I don't accept that because I've seen some of the like engineering analysis on it. Like, so the theory that there were like already bombs planted inside it or something, I don't think that's true. I mean, the whole jet fuel can't melt steel beams thing is, remember, jet fuel doesn't have to melt the steel beams. It just needs to weaken them.
Yeah.
And it's pretty clear that that's what happened. There's pictures of the pylons that were like shot out as they came out that lodged in other buildings. I mean, it wasn't a controlled demolition at all. Maybe World Trade Center 7 was. I mean, that one was shady. There was a great guy.
Is that the one where they kept the bullion and it got moved out?
Yeah, there's some weird stuff like that. I mean, there's an interesting interview that Tucker Carlson did recently with a congressman who had a fascinating story. I mean, he was like one of the key guys all the way back. Kurt Velder or something. Kurt something was a congressman's name. Tucker interviewed him recently, and he was one of the guys during the inquiries into the original World Trade Center bombing.
Yeah.
And so he'd had like this 10-year association with it. And he'd gone to all these like conferences and had all these like inquiries into how to make the intelligence sector better. And then he ends up on the 9/11 Commission report and realizing, shit, these guys don't want to talk about it. They want to cover everything up. All these things they should have done over the last decade that they didn't do, but they treated him like a crackpot. Right? They made his life miserable. They got him fired. He lost his election. And then they just promote all these crazy conspiracy theories. So you don't stop and think, well, maybe it's just the regular conspiracy theory is the true one. Right? That's just how they've done it over the last, getting close to 100 years now.
What about with aliens? Like, you know,
I think that's exactly what happened. If you go all the way back to Roswell, they seed these stories about UFOs to distract people from the fact that they're flying secret aircraft, right? And there's evidence actually weirdly referenced in the new JFK documents that they certainly did that with like U-2, with the U-2 spy plane. There's details of an operation in there where they used not drones, but like gliders and projectiles to create false radar readings for the Russians. So the Russians would see UFOs on the radar while they were flying the U-2 over. So it's likely that this whole time they just keep whenever
it's just Northrop
whenever anyone gets close to some of their big secrets, they say, "Oh yeah, that was aliens," right? Just to distract you. And also, it's very strange that all these people that are coming out at the moment on UFOs, we haven't seen a single scientist.
No,
right? Not one scientist.
And why isn't there just some Bolivian villager just going, look what I found?
Yeah.
Like it's the same with the Tasmanian tiger. Like some hoon is going to run one over, like the last one.
I do believe in the Tasmanian tiger, though. I do genuinely believe it's up there. I think with cryptids, I think it's a bit different. I think that they are real. Like, I'm a big Bigfoot guy, actually.
Are you?
Yeah, huge Bigfoot guy. There's actually some great conspiracy theories about Bigfoot, though, because of how many sightings of Bigfoot that the US authorities do get involved in. And there is a lot of evidence that, particularly through the Appalachian Mountains.
Have you seen those Bigfoot festivals?
The
Bigfoot call.
Yeah.
I love that.
I love Bigfoot.
I love hillbillies, man.
I love the idea that Bigfoot is more than just like a cryptozoology kind of thing, that it's actually like a spiritual entity that lives in the wilderness. And because there are UFO sightings around Bigfoot sightings too.
So
They
there
often
you
go together.
They
often go together.
The US government going,
Something's going on. With
hold
the
on, we'll
Bigfoot,
send
yeah.
up a UFO to distract people.
No, I'm a big Bigfoot fan.
I'm a vampire fan. I just can't think that, like, if everyone really, really high and late at night walking around, there's parts of, I remember being in, have you ever been to Bruges in Belgium?
No, I haven't. But I see what you mean. Like,
Got really high there.
Yeah.
Super dark, no street lights.
If there's going to be vampires,
It was there, and it was like, I was like, totally convinced. And if you have a look at it, like, why is every, like, culture going back, like Hindus 5,000 years ago, Egyptians, they've all got a vampire
I was
story.
really surprised when I was in New Orleans a few years ago to learn that, like, the vampire mythology in New Orleans, they consider entirely legit. And some of those stories are
voodoo,
really weird. Like, they claim that, like, they were, because of back in the wake of the Civil War, there weren't enough women in New Orleans, so they were, like, convincing, like, French prostitutes to get on boats to come over to be wives to all these soldiers and stuff. And, like, they think that's when all these vampires came over. And they treat it, like, with utter seriousness. When you're in New Orleans, there's, like, a kind of touristy trap thing you can do. You can do, like, the vampire tour of Bourbon Street, and they take you to alleyways and say, yeah, someone got drained of all their blood here. I did it. I didn't get very convinced by it.
or drained of your blood.
Yeah, but certainly when you go to, like, the New Orleans cemeteries, you can kind of see how you would get the distinct idea that there are vampires lurking around there, because the whole place is a swamp, right? So they have to build they built all the cemeteries below the waterline, because if you bury someone in the ground, they just shoot back out. The coffins would just shoot back out.
They
of
just
the ground.
pop out of the
So
ground.
they have to basically dig these, like, indentations and down to, like, the actual ground level, and then they put tombs everywhere. So these things are like little cities.
Yeah, the mausoleums.
Yeah, they're creepy ass. Although the coolest thing, I went to one of the biggest cemeteries in New Orleans, and the funniest thing that's in there is you can go visit Nicolas Cage's tomb. So he's bought his tomb for when he dies.
Oh, he's just right.
And it's like it's a pyramid. It's this giant white period with Omnia Ab Una or something written on it. And yeah, when Nicolas Cage dies, he's going in there. And it's hugely controversial in New Orleans because the like in the individual tombs, there's like 1,000 people in each one, because they work as like ovens. So when you go in, you don't go in a coffin. They just put you in, like, all wrapped up, and then you just kind of bake inside there. And then after like a year, 2 years, when the next person goes in, they just get a big broom and they sweep you into the back, and then they put a new person in. And so, like,
they just put you in a jar and ossuary.
And some of the tombs are like public tombs. And so, like, there's actually one really big tomb, which is like the Louisiana musicians' tomb. So all the, like, members of the blues and jazz community in New Orleans, if you're a card carrying, like, union member, when you die, you're entitled to go into the tomb. And so they're usually for many people. It's a kind of a community thing. And then Nicolas Cage came along and just built himself one tomb just for him in the middle of the cemetery. So they really don't like it. But yeah, he could definitely be a New Orleans vampire.
He should, like, it probably is. I reckon most of Hollywood is. I think that's,
Hollywood conspiracies are pretty good. I mean, there's always ones like, is Katy Perry a robot or alien? One of my favorite conspiracy theories I didn't know about until very recently is from a book called Weird Scenes in the Canyon. It's written by a guy called David Macgowan, who's no relationship to me. He's just one of the best authors of, like, deep conspiracy lore from the last 20 years. And most of the stuff he's written on is, like, either, like, really fringe. Like, he wrote a book called Moondoggle about faking the moon landing, and then he wrote a book called Program to Kill, which is about, did America secretly control all the serial killers?
Hold on, just before you go on to the moon landing, why the fuck isn't there a photo of the lunar lander from Earth? Like, why aren't we able to just, like, zoom in and take a photo of it? It's all still.
I'm pretty sure you can.
Has anyone, like, why is it there?
It's got the reflector on it. So when they landed, they put a little reflector on it, and so you can. That's why you know that they really landed up there, because you can shoot a laser. Now I'm sure there's people who tell you that that's
Really,
all
you
it's-
can do that?
Yeah, you can do that.
Oh,
And like
they-
school kids do it. Like, yeah, we definitely landed on the moon. But anyway, this guy, and this is one of the reasons why I really like David McGowan's work, because he started writing this book Moondoggle, which was about did they fake the moon landing? And like as he's one of these people, like as he writes this stream of consciousness stuff, like he convinces himself that they did actually land up there by the halfway point. But he wrote this book called Weird Scenes in the Canyon, and it's about all the bizarre connections between Hollywood, the music industry, and the US intelligence machine in the 1960s and early 1970s. And how they all lived in Laurel Canyon in the shadow of there's a major military installation, actually a part of the US psychological warfare regime.
Oh, MK
right?
Ultra.
Yeah, right there in Laurel Canyon. And all these weird murders and like little stuff that I didn't know until I read it. Like Jim Morrison's dad started the Vietnam War.
Yeah, he was
the captain on the Gulf of the Tonkin incident.
Yeah, he was an admiral.
Yeah,
I think he was an admiral. Like
I think he was an admiral.
Admiral
yeah.
like a rear admiral and like was in charge of an aircraft.
The connections get like even weirder, and it's really worth a read. And like one of the funny ones was like, out of everyone who lived in the canyon in that period, the only guy who didn't have any obvious intelligence agency connection, whether through their parents or brothers or even themselves, was Jack Nicholson. But Jack Nicholson is even weirder because he just doesn't exist. Like there's no record of his family or anything. Like Jack Nicholson just appears out of the ground one day, as if just by magic. Like he just has no record of him ever existing. Just some fascinating shit.
Nosferatu. If anyone was going to be like a 15,000-year-old vampire, it's like Jack Nicholson.
The theory behind all of it, though, is that the Americans were so desperate to head off the anti-war movement that they created the counterculture. Because the anti-war movement in the late 1960s were all these like really buttoned down Quakers and university academics who were quite persuasive, right? So then out of nowhere you get these hippies who are all on drugs and all shagging each other and eventually murdering each other.
Yeah, or all on like this insane amounts of acid.
Yeah, and so they kind of like, erode the credibility of the anti-war movement. Like quite
Manson.
Yeah, like the Manson stuff's fan. There's so many good conspiracy books on Manson. That I think he was unquestionably working for US intelligence at some point, or else was in some way connected with MK Ultra, or what he was effectively doing was what MK Ultra did. Like he was brainwashing people. That is a really fascinating thing. But
well, there's a great conspiracy theory, and I'm not so sure like how crazy it is about some of the MK Ultra experiments in Australia that happened that led to some pretty fucked up cats who were some of our worst serial killers, like the Murphy boys, Anita Cobby, some Janine Baldwin.
The Malat stuff.
And
the stuff, because of course there's stuff about Malat's accomplice, which gets ventilated every now and then.
Well, exactly right.
Before we get into that, let's go talk to the gents real quick.
Okay, no worries. Yeah, there is a body of evidence out there that in the...
Sorry, mate. Oh, no, it's on.
You good?
Yeah.
All right, we'll go again.
Yeah.
There is a body of evidence out there that's not completely crackpot, that there were MK Ultra experiments going on in Australia. They were pulling kids out of like kids' homes, pumping them full of all kinds of like psychedelics, electroshock therapy, the full Clockwork Orange. That's where that stuff came from, and these kids turned into like homicidal maniacs.
Yeah,
and in particular, the thing I've really focused on is Malat. Like why we've never ever gone back and had a look at Malat, like from day dot, where he was, what he was doing, and who his mates were.
Yeah, there is something deeply weird about Malat, and the question is, of course, whether or not he had an accomplice, whether or not someone else knew. Unfortunately, in Australia, like we just don't have good scholarship on this stuff, and unfortunately, a lot of the guys who do get super into it are crackpots. So, but I mean, you probably did more for this stuff than anyone. I mean, when you got really into those Northwest Coast murders that had been unsolved, I mean, I was aware of those going back about maybe 10 years to when I was in the police minister's office. And I remember thinking back then, like, this kind of has the same, at least like geographical topology that some of those murders in the US did, the unsolved ones, that famously a lot of the Americans would pin on other serial killers. And one of the worst offenders for that was, who's the one that ate them? Not Dahmer.
Dahmer ate them.
Dahmer ate them. There was another one, but he had an accomplice, Coral, and I can't remember the other guy's name. But a lot of them would turn out later to have had accomplices. I mean, even John Wayne Gacy, the clown killer, right? Years later, it would come out like he unquestionably had people who knew about what he was doing. And there was even some evidence that, like, he may not have even been responsible for all the bodies that were found in the crawl space.
Yeah, well, with Malat, the inquest found that he hadn't operated alone. That was like the judge found he hadn't operated alone, but the cop said, "Oh well, look, we've got this guy on it,
Yeah.
so that's that's all that really matters." And they never they certainly crafted this narrative that he was this antisocial or just hung with his family, lone wolf killer, all the rest, which is bullshit. He was out and about in Sydney. He was a well-known identity.
So to get into it, you got to go right back to, like, what is the actual theory with this stuff, right? Because I find that a lot of the content people make about it's kind of like the underpants gnome joke from South Park. It's like, well, step 1, create a serial killer. Step 2, Step 3, take over the world. Like, it doesn't. You've actually got to understand what the theory is suggesting before you kind of get into, like, to understand some of the evidence of what was actually going on. And the theory is that through MK Ultra was the program that they later admitted to, but that basically the Americans were researching how to turn people into effectively like robot killing machines, right? Which in the lead up to the Vietnam War would have been quite handy. So it was about studying like how you could potentially brainwash people and make them do whatever that you wanted.
Because getting someone to kill someone is hard to do.
And there's all this data that suggests it's even hard to do in combat with your own soldiers. I mean, in this First World War, what's the percentage on men who didn't fire their rifles? Like something like,
and even the ones that did shot away. It took like a long
and
time.
it's interesting, right? So you think about that in the First World War, and then you think about the efficacy of close quarters combat to now, where you got Navy SEALs who like just go in there and go pop, 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 and shoot everyone, feel nothing, and just do it, right? It's clear that they've conducted all this research about how to create people like that.
Yeah.
And so the theory is that in the 1960s, when all this was happening, when they were doing research on LSD, when they were doing research on trauma conditioning, on locking people in boxes and blasting them with
shock
music,
therapy,
because it wasn't just about that, but it was also about interrogation techniques and things like that. That they figured out this system so that you could basically create serial killers, which would be really good at fighting wars. There's some body of evidence.
They did it in like live in actual combat. In like the CIA gave units in Vietnam like acid,
which
and
is
meth
a thing,
and-
which was a thing called the Phoenix Program and Operation Delta. The Phoenix Program is one of the worst ones. It's mostly come out, and I mean these were cases where the US was sending in guys specifically to brutalize the civilian population to scare people, right? There was part psychological warfare, part assassination
Einsatz
regime.
commandos.
Yeah. I mean, it was like, these are the guys who are cutting off people's ears and things like that. And so they're creating these people who are capable of doing it. Now, the theory is that the process of doing that, the process of identifying these people kind of gets out of their control. And that there just then becomes this like stockpile of biological weapons in the US community in the 1960s who've been either all the way through this process or part of the way through this process, and then they get loose.
The Unabomber.
Well, one of the biggest pieces of evidence for this is that one thing that so many of America's most successful serial killers have in common is a pattern of offending, and quite severe offending, where they're apprehended and then released.
Yeah.
For no apparent reason. I mean, Ted Bundy is a wild example of that.
Crazy.
Bundy's multiple arrests where he's released, then his arrests where he escapes in like increasingly insane Harry Houdini-esque, which Harry Houdini, by the way, was absolutely a US intelligence asset. If you read Weird Scenes in the Canyon, it's got a whole chapter on Houdini, who came out here, by the way, to Australia at the behest of Australian military intelligence. Weird fact. Just as a total aside. Harry Houdini made the first manned air flight in Australia in an aircraft that he purchased at the request of Australian Air Force. We didn't have an Air Force at that point, but Australian military intelligence. He came out here and did that. It's crazy. The Houdini story is wild. But Ted Bundy, escaping from prison cells he shouldn't be able to escape from, apprehended with obvious evidence of having committed murders, and yet then just released back onto the streets.
Well, look, the one with Malat is that, like I put it up on, I put it in the Daily Telegraph a month ago, the identikit of Ivan Milat, the photo, sorry, of Ivan Milat 1964 and the identikit of the Wanda Beach killer. Like those two things are just like they completely line up. And the thing is with Wanda Beach and what we know about the Belangolo murders, there was necrophilia.
Yeah,
like having someone who's just stabbed strangers to death in public is rare, very very rare. Having someone who does it and then has sex with like the dead person is super rare.
That escalation is a feature of every single serial killer throughout history.
Bundy, yeah, that's right.
And then the craziest thing, of course, is that one day all these things stop.
Yeah,
and they just stop.
They just stop.
Now, there's all kinds of theories for why. I mean, one theory was that serial killers were kind of put to bed by social media.
iPhone,
increased social acceptance of sex work is a major factor. Like,
Pornhub.
These people preyed on all these people on the margins of society. So when sex workers have Facebook profiles, when homeless people have Facebook profiles, suddenly it's a lot harder for people to go missing. But it still doesn't make any sense why no one even seems to try anymore.
Yeah.
Like, why did the serial killer as it existed as this kind of boogeyman kind of cease to exist? I mean,
we saw it in popular culture out of nowhere. 1960s, we get Psycho, and then it's like Halloween, Friday the 13th, and it was just like when I was coming up, it was like you legitimately thought getting stabbed to death by Jason Voorhees.
So there's this baseline theory around how like the US government uses MK Ultra to create serial killers to go fight in Vietnam, but then like to take it a step further, and this is what David Macgowan does in his book Program to Kill. He kind of raises this specter of, well, is it something more than that? Is it actually this psychological warfare exercise on the US public? And like one really interesting example, I can't remember if it was him that raised it or it was someone else, was that during Vietnam, as part of Operation Phoenix, where they were going around just brutalizing the Vietnamese civilian population, one thing that was really successful and was actually one of the more ethical things they did was they would trick the Vietnamese into believing there were ghosts in the jungle. So they would use lights and speakers, and so they would keep them away from areas by making them think that their dead ancestors were lurking there, right? And so they wouldn't go over there and then probably saved a lot of lives. But that's not going to work with a Western population. We don't believe in ghosts. So what if you manufacture a new boogeyman of folklore to keep everyone scared?
Yeah, and right? at a time of civil rights, cultural, and like the sexual revolution, all of a sudden women are becoming empowered, getting out.
And now you've got like a new, I mean, that's what a serial killer is, right? Like you're saying, a serial killer is a modern day vampire.
Yeah. And
a modern day folklore kind of creature that preys upon the weak.
Yeah. And the people operating at the margins and the people less likely to be protected by the state. So the gays, the blacks, the sex workers, the homeless.
Was all this created as a way to keep the American population under control? And look, I mean, one of the most controversial field of study is it still going on? And this is where people get into a lot of trouble. And, Alex Jones got sued to the tune of $8 billion over suggesting it. But that one day, all these serial killings stop, and then all these mass shootings begin. And it does seem extremely odd. I mean, if the serial killer psychology that, the FBI has spent billions of dollars researching at Quantico, if all these behavioral science models are correct, I mean, it's not the same pathology as the people who shoot up schools. So why did one day one psychological kind of profile stop existing and get replaced with a completely different one? Where did all the serial killers go, and why did this new pathology crop up in its place?
Yeah, it's not like guns didn't exist in the 1970s.
It's just not organic, right? I mean, if you think about like kind of modern mental illnesses that didn't used to exist, I mean, the existence of kids with Asperger's did not mean that, kids stopped getting bipolar, right? Like one doesn't cancel out the other. So why do we seem to have one psychological pathology just sharply ends and then a different one begins? And then when you start exploring all the kind of very odd connections around some of the like contemporary school shooters and mass killers, starting all the way back, interestingly, with Timothy McVeigh in the like early 1990s. I can't remember the name of the woman who wrote it. One of my
Oklahoma bomber.
Yeah. One of my favorite books on conspiracy theories is a book called Aberration in the Heartland of the Real, which is an exploration of all.
I can't believe you read that shit.
I read everything, man. I have like an autistic tick about reading stuff. Like the number of times where I've asked myself a question that could have simply been answered by Wikipedia, and then I've sat down and read all the books that were referenced in Wikipedia. Is too many to count. But in that book, it goes through all the Oklahoma City bombing conspiracy theories, but then actually finds all this evidence that, yeah, the FBI lied about stuff. I mean, there were meetings that Timothy McVeigh was going to with all these like white supremacist groups where every member was an FBI agent except for Timothy McVeigh. Like there's one of the reasons why Timothy McVeigh was obviously so desperate to be executed, because he thought he was insane. Because he was like being gang stalked by the FBI. There's all kinds of crazy things like that. Contemporarily, there is this constant evidence that, particularly with the school shooters, that they have had contact with the FBI, like over and over again. One of these incidents will happen and the FBI has to admit that, yeah, this guy was on our radar. And then it'll turn out that they were in a Discord chat with an FBI agent who was saying, wouldn't it be cool if you got a gun? Like over and over again, this keeps happening. And it really does make you wonder, like, to what extent does the US government know that these things goes on? And I'm not saying that they're responsible for it.
And so, like, if I'm reading you right, like what you're suggesting is that there's a possibility there was like a modus operandi in the 60s, which was like, get someone vulnerable, add shitloads of drugs, torture them in this way, let them go with a knife in this community. I mean, my theory, and then that's changed like with technology and the need, and like that rather.
But there's
like,
one interesting
like
thing,
people
right?
being groomed in chat.
If you're an obsessive deep politics aficionado like me, there is this one kind of break in it that, like, if you're going to like kind of prima facie take things on, face value, I mean, there is this massive change in the US intelligence community that happens. I mean, in the wake of not just the deep failures of the Vietnam War, failures in Cuba, and the assassination of John F. Kennedy, is that when Jimmy Carter comes in 76, 77, there are massive reforms to the US intelligence service. And I mean, they call it the de-evolution of the CIA that happens in 1977. When Carter comes in, the first thing he's saddled with is it's a Woodward and Bernstein article. I can't remember what it was, but it was a precursor to Iran-Contra. And it was like an immediate intelligence scandal. Carter does this much smarter than certainly what Trump's doing now. But he strips almost 6,000 jobs out of the CIA. He redoes the way America does security clearances. So, and actually, that's something a lot of that's in the current JFK files. This the fact that since the end of the Second World War to 1977, the CIA had a program called QK Enchant, which was about same kind of naming convention as MK Ultra, but that program was about providing non-vetted personnel. These are just civilians, business people, in some cases foreign nationals, providing them with security clearances so they could be briefed into CIA operations. And this was going on for years. Clay Shaw in the JFK case. I mean, he was one of the people involved in QK Enchant, a civilian businessman briefed into the CIA. They were cowboys, right? Their funding was insane. They were just getting all this money, and you can go back and look at the budget appropriations between the end of the Second World War and 1977, and there's a black budget because you don't know what it's being spent on. But you can see the dollars and cents. They're appropriating billions, tens of billions of dollars, and never telling the American public what it's for.
The DEA did exactly the same thing.
But this all ends in 1977 when Carter changes the way the CIA works. And so you no longer have, like what I said, like the Q clearance, like the top level security clearance. You now have these code word clearances. You now get the full compartmentalization of intelligence operations where one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing. And look, I think a big reason why they did that was because the vulnerabilities that are exposed through JFK, where, I mean, if Operation Mongoose and the Louisiana Circle really were responsible for JFK's assassination, Alan Dulles absolutely knew about it. So the 77 reforms really are about giving everyone plausible deniability, because now there's no longer a guy sitting at a desk with a filing cabinet with every single secret operation arranged by code name. You know, these things they're privatized. And those 6,000 guys that Carter fired out of the CIA, what did they all do? They started private intelligence companies. And who were their clients? The CIA. So whether Carter intended to or not, he privatized the CIA. And so
then there's no accountability, there's no oversight, and these people just go.
So things go from being crazy, but I mean, even
in-house
with the worst things they did, at least you could kind of make the case that, whether it's, the brutality of the Vietnam War or assassinating a possibly communist president, like at least you can see
Chile, you mean?
Yeah, well, any of them.
Any of them.
JFK included. But you then get this shift where, I mean, who knows what the hell they're doing. And this is where that period post 77 is where that infamous conspiracy theory, the octopus, comes from, which involves Australia via the Nugan Bank incident.
The Nugan walk us through it, bro.
Right. So the Nugan Bank was a CIA cutout here in Australia.
I don't know how many fucking times in politics I've had some crackpot boomer ring me up and go, the Nugan Bank.
Well, it was huge. It was huge. And, it was one of my favourite Australian journalists, Ross Coulthard. Was one of the guys who broke that, who did a lot of intelligence stories back then. It was one of the first times this stuff really broke out into the public domain. And, because the guy died, there was a mysterious suicide. It had all the parts of a classic kind of, deep politics story. And so it did become this part of Australian kind of conspiracy folklore. What the hell were they doing? But to go back to the initial point about some of these, allegations around MK Ultra type stuff happening in Australia, that's kind of the in on it. And I mean, MK Ultra was in Canada, and actually a lot of it was run through the head of the Canadian Psychiatric Society, who ran an institution in Montreal.
Yes.
Where they were actually conducting these experiments on Canadian soil, on Canadian citizens.
A lot of them in kids' homes.
Yeah. And so then
one of the guys, I forget his name, worked here in Australia, at Durrag Boys Home and the like.
Well, and that's the kind of creepy stuff that makes you think some of this might be true. I actually don't like reading about those conspiracy theories as much because they're not fun. They're awful, and the people who get super into them, they drive you insane because there's so much evidence of them. And one of the more recent ones that's kind of come to light in the wake of particularly post Epstein and the Pizzagate stuff is people revisiting a lot of these stories from the early 1990s. And so one of the classic ones is, it was called at the time the Satanic Panic, remember? And there were these kids coming out of the woodwork saying, they were abused in children's homes and in daycare centers, and that the character of the abuse involved pentagrams and pig's entrails and satanic stuff, right? And then you had the debunking. The public debunking of it came out where all these psychiatrists would come out and say, oh, well, it's, memory manipulation from hypnosis and none of it's true. But now we know that in multiple cases, these criminals committed the actual crimes and then deliberately dressed up crime scenes. So the kids would go home to their parents and say, yeah, the devil came out and did this to me and all this weird stuff happened. And then the parents would say, well, that can't be true. There's no secret tunnels under McMartin Preschool, which was the famous one. The McMartin Preschool case was one of the worst ones. And it became a cause celebre for the American kind of skeptics who said, because the country was essentially dividing by the flyover states who believed that Satan was real and he was living in these towns, versus the enlightened East and West Coast states who was saying that, oh no, it's all made up. But then later it would turn out that no, they really did it. There really was tunnels under McMartin Preschool that were filled in, and there were multiple childcare centres on US military bases where this stuff happened. And we'd only find out about it years later, well after all this. We had 60 Minutes reports here in Australia, Jana Vent talking to psychiatrists saying there is no satanic panic. And then it all turns out to be true.
Yeah, and that's interesting because just in terms of the Malat thing, that often gets, in terms of, misinformation gets thrown up there. Oh, the satanic connections. There's this Southwest Sydney sort of Latvian and, like Ukrainian satanic cult.
Who was the one? The mayor down in Wollongong, and he was a child sex. Arkell, right?
Yeah.
So that's what happened when he was killed.
Yeah.
The scene was dressed up with the pentagrams and everything.
Yeah, and so everyone didn't go, oh, who did Arkell know?
Yeah,
and he knew a lot of people. The other one too is like with Malat is what do you do with these people in society? Like once you've created them. My theory is that Malat just became a hitman for the King's Cross Mafia. Green lighted by that's my view.
That's one theory. Yeah, I mean that's definitely what they think happened to some of these American guys, like with being disappeared overseas and stuff, who tended to work in the military beforehand. So yeah, it's entirely possible because most people can't do that stuff. And someone who can do that stuff is enormously valuable.
Exactly, and knows how to do it, can do it, and like again and again.
Thankfully now we have drones. And, I think one of the most greatest pieces of technology the last few decades is the Raytheon R9X, the missile with the swords. So no more hitmen, no more, people compromise. It's just a man in a room presses a button and giant blades come out of the sky and kill you in your car. I think that's one of the best pieces of technology America's ever invented, because they used to blow up whole suburbs, they used to blow up whole city blocks. Now they can just kill you in your car from the sky.
They can get you
and you don't need to take a kid out of a boys' home and
train
give
them up,
give him the Ludovenko technique, have him chopping up homeless people in his spare time.
But what's it like? Going back to your what you were saying about how there was a sort of a change in the 70s to 80s, and then we saw the emergence of the school shooter.
Yeah.
What's the benefit of that?
It's bizarre, right? There is just but that goes to that point, that kind of evolution of the theory around MK Ultra. Like, is it about just creating this permanent atmosphere of fear in the American public? Is that their method? Is that the control methodology that they use?
So you put up with like a shit job and never climbing out of your class.
Your Amazon wage cage that you're locked in.
Exactly.
And your rent that's going out of control.
But you're not dying at the hands of, a stabbing murder or being...
Is that part of it? I mean...
Shot in a shopping centre.
The only thing that makes me not believe that is that I know how sophisticated politicians are, and the answer being not very. And how could you sustain something like that, like a system of control like that for that long? We couldn't even sustain the COVID measures for that long. Like, thank God. So I don't know. I don't know the extent of that.
But possibly, like, if you're out on the margins, you're operating, some private intelligence psyops operation with government money, and you just do it for fun.
Well, exactly, and that was my point about the shift in the U.S. intelligence community.
And like counterintuitively, you have school shooters. What does it do? Makes people want to arm up.
Yeah. Could it have been that? But there's something very odd about so many of them, and what the other odd thing is they just seem to come and go, right? Like, there's never any. And this is one of the things I think in my mind makes me think that in Australia it may not be necessarily the same thing, because like here we fixate on them for a really long time, whereas the Americans don't. These things kind of pop up and disappear in the United States.
You can't keep track of them.
That's why when people are like really critical of Rupert Murdoch, right? But Murdoch only arrived in the United States in the mid-1970s. Right? When he bought, I think he'd always owned like a newspaper in St. Louis, but then he bought the
Washington Post, didn't he?
No, that was Bezos recently.
The New
Wall
York.
Street Journal recently. But back in the 70s, he bought the news, the Post, the New York Post.
New York Post, that's right.
And it was, the culture of American journalism at that point was, it was the Woodward and Bernstein shit. It was
Serious.
Watergate. It was serious guys in tweed jackets, right? And Murdoch brought that same energy that he had in the UK to the United States. Like when Watergate happened, Murdoch splashed with a garbage strike in New York, right? Like he just didn't care. He was like, well, this is what people care about. And there's a fascinating example of him kind of bucking the establishment trend, which is Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker.
Oh, yeah.
Which he ran like every day. The Son of Sam killings, right? Murdoch ran every day. He popularized those things. These things used to just kind of happen and people wouldn't like necessarily know who they were. I mean, Manson was an outlier. A lot of those serial killers at the time just kind of emerged and then disappeared. But Murdoch really changed the game in the 70s because he turned these people into celebrities, which again, Oliver Stone, who's deep into this stuff, kind of portrayed in Natural Born Killers. Right?
Yeah.
The habit of the American media to turn serial killers into heroes.
And start cheering for them.
That begins in the 70s.
Ramirez, when he got the death sentence, the court was packed.
Yeah.
With women throwing their underpants.
Oh, yeah. It's crazy, man.
It's crazy.
It is crazy.
Like the guy had like...
Women do love that stuff.
That was crazy. Ted Bundy. Really, really crazy. But like we didn't have it in Australia like
Malat. Malat's really the only exception.
Malat was our first serial killer.
Yeah.
There was the granny killer. He was our first serial killer.
Yeah.
And like no one really shone the Murdoch certainly shone the light on these guys and we went, oh fuck, this is a thing.
Yeah.
So now we know, which is a massive public benefit. He's probably doing it because he knows it sells papers, but at least we knew. In Australia, we didn't know. Like,
but that's part of the culture. That's the culture of Australian law enforcement, though, which is a huge problem.
Yeah,
right? Like I mean, there could be serial killers out there right now that you wouldn't know about. I mean, look at what just happened with the Dural caravan thing.
Yeah,
like when you see the anatomy of how much stuff they actually keep from you. I mean. In the United States, so many of the biggest crime stories in Australia right now, like that awful case of the Vietnamese lady who was murdered and burnt to death in the car recently, right? Like it took 24 hours before a name came out. I mean, we know nothing about the alleged offenders. Like in the United States, you would know everything.
Yeah,
like they would have run every single detail about that already. And it's kind of a better system in a lot of ways. Like here, we keep a lid on all this stuff. And so people aren't really well informed about, well, what is the character of criminality in your community? Like,
well, we have like in Australia, we have just and especially New South Wales. You've worked for a New South Wales police minister.
Oh yeah.
So I'm not telling you anything. We have one of the most powerful political police forces in the world.
In the world. Like, we are one of the largest.
The largest and the oldest.
I remember when Andrew,
like Karen Webb
had
a 2-page puff piece in the paper about her.
They are that powerful.
Yeah, they are that. Like she's a political character.
Before we all lost our jobs in Gallagher's office, that was we were going to have to pick another police commissioner at that point. Scipione was going to leave. And you remember at the time, there was all like the infighting, the politics between all the police commissioners about who's going to take
Don't
over.
worry about the Vatican.
Yeah. Well, cop politics is insane. I mean, they had been spying on each other. They were alleging corruption between each other. And yet the culture of the joint was that the government was being asked to choose between these people. And I said at the time, I was like, maybe we could go overseas because we'd had the experiment with Peter Ryan, who was the police commissioner during the Sydney Olympics, and he was ex-London Met.
Came in after the Wood Royal Commission.
Yeah, and I said to a lot of people back then, I said, well, can't we go back to the British? Like, can't we find someone? And someone made this point to me. He said, like, we did that back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, because a former, like, London Met police commissioner could do the job here. But he said, you got to realise there's only one police force in the world at the scale of ours, and that's the Los Angeles Police Department.
Yeah.
Like it's the Los Angeles Police Department and Sydney are like neck and neck. And then like the next biggest is like South Africa, like in terms of like caseload and workload and numbers.
No numbers.
Like, there's really no equivalence anywhere else in the world. You couldn't.
And they have a long culture, intergenerational.
Yeah.
People like you seen the same names
they
turn
are
back.
so powerful. I mean, I would argue that the New South Wales Police Force is the most powerful organisation in New South Wales and possibly Australia.
Yeah, I would agree.
I mean, and I was impressed with the fact over the Dural thing that, you know, the AFP were even beginning to stand up to them, because the AFP are minnows compared to the political power of the New South Wales Police Force, right? And you just don't mess with it.
You don't.
Like,
And people forget that the New South Wales Police Force started out as a militia.
Yeah,
They weren't a police force. There was no one here to police. What they came in to do was basically hunt down escaped convicts and start the war with the blacks.
yeah, there was no other organisation.
The first act of the New South Wales Parliament was to appoint a lieutenant in 1824. Was to appoint a lieutenant governor who was Wellington's right hand man in the Peninsular Wars, who had led the the fight back from the cavalry against the Gueros, the guerrillas. That's where the term guerrilla war comes from. The Peninsular Wars. He led the cavalry campaign against the Gueros after they'd beaten Napoleon. He comes out. The first act of the New South Wales Parliament, which was the first parliament in Australia, was to appoint him. And the first thing he does is create the New South Wales Mounted Police in 1825. They're having their first and heavily armed, super powerful.
Yeah, from the moment they were created.
Those guys
they were a problem.
And they went out and led these wars of conquest and then owned the land.
Yeah.
So these were powerful.
They still kind of do own the state.
They
still do. I mean, it always terrified me.
Hello to the New South Wales Police.
Yeah. Thankfully, I haven't had much drama with the New South Wales Police, but yet. They are terrifying. They're legitimately terrifying because, you know, and I say it's not just that I always say in Australian public life, the most powerful people are the people who face no consequences, right? Politicians aren't as powerful as you think, because politicians face the prospect of consequences every 3 to 4 years, right? The most powerful people in Australia are police, because they face no consequences for when they fail or when they indulge in malfeasance.
Like the Wood Royal Commission. After that, what they all did is just resign en masse. They resigned, and no one went to jail.
No one got, nothing happened to any of them.
None, like 700 cops resigned for the most egregious corruption involved.
And no one went to prison.
No one goes, I think 3 might have got convicted, didn't do any time.
I was there.
They all just ended up in, Port Douglas, getting fat.
I was there for 3 years. And look, I do have a lot of respect for the work they do, and a lot of crazy stuff goes on in New South Wales, and you do need hard heads to manage it. But my biggest objection to them was the shootings that occurred. And I think we were dealing with, in that period from 2011 to 2014, we're dealing with about 11.
There was the Ronnie Levi shooting down at, you're talking about
Levi was historical. I mean, and no one ever went to prison for that. I
Yeah.
mean, the police were just quietly exited down at Bondi.
Yeah.
But I mean, recent ones. So I think it kicked off, and it wasn't a shooting, but it was the Brazilian boy who was stealing the pack of Tim Tams who got tasered to death while on LSD. And then we had a string, 3 in a row, of men with severe mental illness who had kind of slipped through the cracks of the system, who'd had bad interactions with police and were shot. I mean, and these guys were shot in the back while holding bread knives. I mean, there was that was one in Armadale or Tamworth. I can't remember the kid's name, but that story was awful because he had schizophrenia. He'd been in care, and when he's due to be released, he had to be, as under the rules, as a psychiatric patient, he had to be released into the police's custody, and they had to drive him back to his house. And all the hospital said was, look, this guy has delusions that the police are coming to kill him. So you can't show up in uniform. So what do? They showed up in uniform, and the guy jumps out a window and he leads police on a foot chase where he runs into a Baker's Delight, grabs a bread knife, and an off-duty cop then shoots him. And we were sitting there in government going, well, this guy's kind of not on him, really. Like
It's foreseeable.
Now, what do you think happened to all the officers involved in that? Nothing happened to any of them. I mean, the woman who shot the gent because she mistakenly reached for her gun, not her taser, she lost her job. Like, that was probably as good as it gets for justice.
The big yellow thing here.
Yeah.
Or the big black thing here.
That case is awful because, like, you couldn't go into the hearings or anything, but like you were reading the transcripts, and as you were reading them, like it dawned on you what had happened. And because as you were reading through the transcript, it dawned on you a lot sooner than it perhaps dawned on everyone in the room. And you go, oh no, she's forgot that's not her taser. And because she yells. And all the witnesses, there were paramedics in the room. The victim's father, I believe, witnessed it. And she yells, taser, 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 while emptying 15 rounds into the guy.
Mm.
Now, she lost her job.
Mm. The guy, what about the guy that didn't go to jail for tasering the 90-year-old?
That was bad.
That's bad. That's bad.
That was real bad.
That's bad, man. It's just like, you can't believe it. And like you think about these people that go to, like, there's people that go, there was a guy on the North Shore that served up some dodgy aioli.
Yeah.
You know, like workplace health and safety. He's like, he killed a guy because the egg mayonnaise was bad. He does 3 years jail.
Yeah.
You know.
And you do nothing for that.
Yeah.
Right? And this is the thing, the most powerful people in your society are the people who face no consequences.
What about the bureaucrats? Now, come on, let's get into
bureaucrats face consequences though, right? Because being white-answered by bureaucrats means you'll never work again, right? The two people in our society, the two classes of people in our society that face no consequences for their failures are cops and journalists. They're the two protected species of Australian public life, right? You know, name a journalist who's ever lost their job because of, you know, a failure of fact-checking or something like that, right? I mean, the guy who dubbed in the gunshot in the ABC piece about war crimes didn't lose their job, right? Journalists lose their jobs because either they bully staff, bash their wives, do drugs, or talk about Israel. They're the only ways journalists can lose their job, right? So if you just don't do drugs, don't bash your missus, don't bully your staff, and you never mention Israel, then a journalist can have a job forever, no matter how incompetent they are, right?
Yeah, what's the oversight body of Australian journalism?
There's none.
There's none. And you just
only one person has ever lost their job for something that they did in a journalistic capacity, and that's Lisa Wilkinson over the Walkley speech.
Yeah, that's right.
That was the only time anyone ever lost their job.
And you talk about this lament about a post-truth world, you know, and that politicians can say whatever they want, but journalists
can do whatever they want.
They can say whatever they want. They can
right?
say whatever they want about whatever anyone else has said about whatever they want. And like they've blurred this line between opinion and like proper journalism, and it's why I think that you see people going to podcasts,
like that, exactly,
because they just want to hear it from the horse's mouth.
Because they don't want to have this filter where they don't know if things are true. I mean, I saw,
or if they're getting the whole story, you know. Like,
there was a wild one today, right? A crazy one, and it was down in Victoria. Monique Ryan was doing a forum. She was doing a forum for Friends of the ABC. She was complaining, saying, "So ABC, no cuts, whatever." Right? You can imagine what it was like, right? Now, there's this mad guy down there. I can't remember his name, Matt something.
Oh, the guy that comes in.
Yeah. He looks like a bikie, but he runs this thing down there called the National Workers. So it's basically like this Victorian guy has looked around at the situation of the Victorian left and gone, oh man, all the unions are really gay and the DLP sucks, so I'm going to start my own union for white men. And so he goes in and he starts yelling at Monique Ryan about immigration, right? And this elderly woman walks up and just throws a haymaker at his face. Now it connects, but it doesn't do much. Like, it basically looks like you hit with a spitball, right? And he just laughs. But you read the ABC reporting, and the ABC reporting says, you know, a intruder into this forum provoked an elderly woman into punching him. And you think, okay, what if it was the other way climate around protester had walked into a Peter Dutton press conference and that a Liberal Party supporter had thrown a haymaker? Like, it's not going to be provoked. Like, but there's no recourse for any of that. They can basically do whatever they want, and there's not much you can do about it. When I became a consultant in 2019, I kind of put it out there and said, look, you know, I have a background in doing the dumbest and weirdest shit imaginable. So if you got dumb and weird shit you want done, I can do it. The very first call I got, the first cold call for a prospective client was from a senior New South Wales businessman who said, I want to dig dirt and I want to get rid of this particular journalist. And the amount of money he offered me was like, if I had done, let's say if I had done 5 of these jobs, I would have been a millionaire. But I had to say to him, I was like, dude, I can't do it. I mean, like I could take your retainer and work on it for a few months, but I can tell you right now, no one has ever scalped one of these guys. It doesn't matter what they do, whatever they've done to you, whatever lies they've told, no one ever gets any of them, ever. I mean, you can make a complaint to the press council. I mean, I heard a story once about a guy they got rid of because of plagiarism. But just think, I mean, you've worked in that building across the road for how long? You've seen journalists come and go out of the press gallery. How many have you ever seen get fired?
Never once.
They don't get fired.
Like what's it called? The press council?
Yeah.
Like, which
There's
is
no
what?
accountability for.
Which is just like, who cares?
And this is why
It's
the
like-
public are just turning on them and saying, well, you know, just like all the worst people in society, these people that have no consequences for their actions. I mean, look at what happens when they get things wrong. Like, how many times now have they gotten like elections wrong? Right? There's no consequences. How many economic predictions do they get wrong? It's now like a joke online. Like, when there's so many journalists now who run stuff, and punters will say, well, I better get ready for the opposite to happen then. Right? And there's no consequences for them whatsoever.
I've been trying to get up stories with journalists about population.
They won't touch that.
No.
They won't
But
touch
like,
that.
I've been going and saying, who does the UN's population modelling? You know, like people think that the IPCC has got this, and I'm like, I've been a climate activist for 20 years, and I'm going like, I don't think it's going to be the problem that everyone thinks it is. I think the problem is going to be far more. Is going to be population. It's like a descent into low population, like, you know, low or, you know, zero growth, or, you know, recession, like a future. Who does I'm asking them, just not as in terms of pitching a yarn. I'm asking them in terms of just an intellectual exercise. Go and have a look.
Yeah.
Tell me I'm wrong. Or do you agree with me on this, that the UN's population modelling is just total bullshit, and it's what's informing the IPCC? Like, I talked to Andy Pittman, who wrote the IPCC report. He's an Australian scientist, of course. AO wrote it back in 2007, and he goes, oh no, we just get the number from the UN and put it in our model. So we're the guys that do the physics and the biochemistry and say, this many people burning this many people times this much energy and blah, 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 equals climate change. But the this many people thing, they just take from the UN. And I can't get a journalist to even look at it.
I've actually seen stuff. I'll send it to you. I've seen an interesting study on that, actually, about how some of those models, some of the most, like, on the outer scale of the consequences of climate change, those population models fail to take into effect the natural population decline from the consequences of climate change.
Exactly. That is exactly.
So when they're modeling them out to say, oh yeah, you know, the world's going to end, but as the world ends slowly and people are dying across the subcontinent, and you got places where you can't live anymore and people are starving to death, and the population starts going down, and then you got the wars for water and whatever, and the population starts going down, the model doesn't adjust for those at all.
The DRC, which is like one of the most politically, economically, ecologically vulnerable places in the world, is where all the population growth is going to be.
Yeah.
It's Central Africa, and
that's also where everyone's going to die.
That's right. We only need a war there, which there is constantly, to get big. Like, someone wants to make some money and starts arming, arming them up. And those models go out the window. But you just can't get someone
no one wants to talk about it. And even just in the last, like, if you go back to like when climate change gets put on the agenda in a big way in 2004 through to now, and you look at the models on birth rates. I mean, on the right, we bitch and moan about, white replacement or whatever. But even amongst non-white populations, the birth rate is trending down. It's just trending down off a higher base. No one's talking about redoing the 2004 models to reflect the fact that, we couldn't have predicted 20 years ago that Zoomers were just going to stop rooting. which they're now like pandas. Like, when was the last time you heard like a story in the Daily Telegraph about like teen pregnancy or whatever?
I saw this the other day.
Over.
No shit. I was going through Redfern the other day. I was coming back from the Royal Easter Show. I went out there to see my astrologer, but that's another story. When it came back, and I was going through Redfern, and there were two young women coming along, looked a lot like 18, 19, two sisters with two kids in the strollers coming along. And I just went, Tasmania, 1985.
Yeah, but
I just went, they were in pairs. Like all the young women had kids.
Exactly. That was a huge issue.
That was a massive issue.
I remember, I saw it up close a few years ago.
Everyone was rooting like rattlesnakes.
When,
everyone had kids.
When they were
just don't see it.
When was the Alex Greenwich abortion decriminalisation on? That was probably like 2020 or so.
Yeah.
I was obviously working for the anti-abortion guys. But I was pulling together what little data there was on actual abortion rates. And from then to like the previous time I'd done it, I've probably done like 3 anti-abortion campaigns in my career, watching the decline in abortion rates, like to the point where, as for the right, as egregious as that law was, the rates are now getting so low where you kind of think, and like people think that maybe the abortion is contributing to the birth rate decline, but it's not, because the abortion rate is going down as well.
One of the biggest things that contributing to the declining birth rate is people freaking out about climate change.
Well,
Just going, I'm not having that many kids.
I don't know though.
Like you'd never see in Marrickville. I live in Marrickville. You never see like hipsters with 4 kids.
People don't do it anymore.
They don't. They
have
4
one.
Kids. They might have 1. Yeah. They might have 2, but 3 or 4.
And plus, the economy is so bad that you can't afford to do it.
Exactly.
Right.
And so getting someone interested in that, and like journalists, and you go, like, you should be at least curious and like skeptical. Watching this thing come down range. But you just can't get them to do it.
But this goes to the reason why things like podcasts and alternative media are becoming so popular, because we can sit here and have that conversation, right? Journalists would freak out about that conversation. They'd be like, who are we going to offend if we talk honestly about this stuff? They don't want to offend anyone.
Yep.
Because their audiences now are so marginal, they can't afford to lose anyone. And really the only people left still consuming mainstream media are the really easily offended. So you just end up with this, kind of void of actual like current affairs, because you can't touch current affairs because it's all pretty spicy. Right? You can't talk about immigration. You can't talk about population. You can't talk about, should women be in combat? Everything we've talked about today would probably get you fired from, working for a mainstream media company, which is why they don't talk about it, which is why none of them get fired. So...
Well, it's a fascinating point, mate, in terms of accountability. Now, you just touched on the void, so I want to talk to you about the occult and necromancy. Why don't we see why don't we see more mysticism, more like astrology, more of the occult? It
gets a really bad rap, right? Like, it just became this thing that's kind of like female coded. Like, are you?
That's right. You only got the Women's Weekly.
I mean, I think women are partly responsible for that. I mean, I get angry at girls all the time and tell them, like your horoscope isn't for, figuring out, is Chad going to go on a date with you? Your horoscope is for figuring out the fate of kingdoms, right?
Yeah,
like,
that's
this is
right.
the whole reason this stuff exists.
Yeah. Will the king have 3 kids?
Yeah,
or
women
not?
got super into it in the 60s and 70s, and I think there's some conspiracy theories behind that too. But yeah, so it kind of like loses its kind of masculinity when, name one great female astrologer, right? They're all dudes, like from John Dee to Aleister Crowley, right? It's an intrinsically masculine pursuit. One of the most interesting things about Australia is the extent to which occultism creeps into public affairs. Hyde Park, designed by an occultist. Canberra, designed
Notice
by an occultist.
Have a look at people. Look at the massive plinth. Have a look at the plinth. Like the occult sculpture.
So I did a lot of research,
like
into
in
this,
our
right?
war memorials.
So it's a lot of masonry.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of masonry
Odd fellows,
stuff. Yeah.
They're everywhere.
And like a lot of the weird Egyptian stuff in Sydney is from like these Egyptian Rite Masons that were active in the 1920s, who kind of capitalized on the popularity of Egyptology in the mid to late 1920s as a way to kind of sneak a lot of this stuff past people.
Yeah.
I
That plinth in Hyde Park actually is a sewer outlet.
it is a sewer outlet. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I love that. I just
But there's
go,
probably some
one-
ritual significance
I
to that
know.
as well.
I
But-
know.
But yeah, there's a lot of
Where
that.
it is.
There's a lot of that stuff in Australian public life. I mean, we used to like Alfred Deakin, of course, was famously a theosophist.
I can't say it.
I can never say it.
I can't say similarly.
Did you know that the
Did you know that Canberra was designed by Burley Griffin?
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
he was very much influenced by Rudolf Steiner.
And it's kind of the whole thing. I
The
think
whole
it's designed. I think the whole thing is designed as like a kind of orgone energy extractor. Like that's why people in Canberra are so miserable all the time. Like
It's
just you're constantly having your like primal energy sucked out of you,
And
it's
somewhere-
all being funneled towards that hill. Like you're just losing all of
And
it.
in the middle of it, there's
That's why they don't age that much. That's why the politicians like are all kind of youthful
Yeah.
until they leave, and then it like collapses.
yeah.
on
Then
them
they
really
just go
quickly.
grey and die. And
That's why the ones. That's why like Howard always looked really elderly because he wasn't living in the lodge. He was living at Kirribilli in a normal place. Whereas if you live in the lodge, like you're just soaking it up. You don't need adrenochrome in Canberra.
well, it's funny. Like Steiner, like there's like a huge community like Steiner education throughout
Yeah.
Australia, and it's like middle class white people that send their kids there.
I want to send my kids there. I don't want my kids going.
Like, have you looked into it? Like
I've looked into it.
I've
yeah.
studied like Steiner, like biodynamics. That's what biodynamics is.
Yeah,
and that's
yeah.
where they get like cow shit. They like on the right moon,
Mm-hmm.
the right cow shit, fill up horns, bury it in the ground, and then after 3 months, dig it back up. It becomes a colloid. They add that to like in homeopathic.
Yeah, yeah, they do
quantities
the thing where
toward-
they bash the Bible on it
yeah,
and stuff. Yeah.
yeah, and then they put it through a flow form. Then they spray it out, and that's going to do some like wonders to the environment.
Yeah.
That's biodynamics. That guy like has designed this great big cellular organism that's Canberra, and
Yeah.
like it's in the design of our
Yeah,
impacting
yeah.
our politicians.
That's
It's
why
everywhere.
whenever Canberrans get angry about like whether it's their their tram or whatever they got, I'm like, it's all good. Like whatever you can do to kind of destroy whatever kind of structure they've built there, you should absolutely do. Like whenever I go to Canberra, I refuse to stay in the parliamentary circle. Like I've never once stayed at I think it's the Hyatt, the really nice hotel inside when you cross the bridge.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
always stay in like the QT or something, like in the actual city.
the Hotel Canberra.
Yeah, yeah. I don't, or Little National or somewhere. I just refuse to like actually sleep inside the Canberra Circle. I think
Have your like essence sucked out?
have
of
your
you?
essence sucked out of you. Like it's just a bad place. It's just a horrible, horrible place.
It is a horrible
Yeah.
place. And you look up on the hill and like there's the CIA
Yeah.
up there with their massive monument, the Hawk.
There's so much weird stuff in Canberra that people don't appreciate. Like
Is it true that the whole thing was designed to be a bunker, like Parliament House? Like if you look,
Parliament House was absolutely designed to be a bunker.
like
So-
and it's like a military, and basically
Yeah.
they designed it like let's
the
make
second one and also the first one. I mean, the interesting thing about the first one is it's designed to be just out of range of the largest deck gun that existed in 1901.
really there you
so
go.
the thinking was that by putting it in Canberra and putting Parliament House where it was, the biggest deck gun that existed on a ship in 1901 couldn't reach it.
Fuck, that's a long way.
Yeah. Oh, but they could reach that far. Like, if you just pointed it like up, like yeah. But
And wait for the world to
It's-
spin.
yeah. But the current Parliament House, when you get into the bowels of it, I've only ever actually worked for Canberra politicians on a couple of occasions, and I avoid it like the plague. I've worked in politics for 20 years, but I hate the whole place and I hate the culture of it, and I've avoided it. But I have gone with MPs and seen bits of the guts of it. There are cells in there. So they actually, when they were building it, because the old one had cells too, and I think we used to have cells at New South Wales Parliament.
No, there's still cells.
I thought they got rid of them.
No, there's a cell. If you don't turn up to a parliamentary inquiry,
Oh, that's the cell for it. Yeah,
yeah. There's
Well,
apparently
they've got them. They've got good ones in Canberra. But the story went that there was a goat that lived down there. Have you ever
goat?
heard this?
a
So
goat.
the story goes.
GOAT.
A GOAT. Horns and shit. And the story goes, it was back in the late 1990s. the Farmers Association for Christmas gave Howard a goat, like a live prize-winning goat, and they didn't know what to do with it. And they just said to a staffer, like, take care of it, and expecting it to be moved off-site. And the story goes that they took it down into the bowels where the cells were and just left it there, and someone forgot about it. And
it died.
Well, it was down there for a while. They were feeding it, and there was like a goat walking around the guts of Parliament for some time.
There was a punk band in Tasmania, what they were called, Lubricated Goat.
We had great like extreme metal bands down in Tasmania always had great names, like Have a Go Ya Mug, who released their seminal album Intense Hammer Rage.
Yes.
Which was the one that got picked up by the AFP.
Yes.
Because it had like gory shit on it.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I met one of those guys once at the Brisbane Hotel.
Yep.
Yeah.
The Time Machine at the Brisbane Hotel, mate.
And the reason I remember that night was because it lives in infamy.
Because it's the only one you remember.
Well,
because it was.
I had some shockers. The last couple of times at the Brisbane Hotel was shockers for me because I like drinking dark beer. I normally drink 2 years old.
Oh, man, I should have told me because I've had you drinking
No,
Hawks Lager. I've been trolling John all day with Hawks Lager.
It's actually delicious. It's not a bad beer, and you can often get it for $15 from liquor stores if you're doing it.
And this is not a commercial endorsement at all.
No, well, you're not monetized
unless Hawks want to reach out down at the leisure club.
Yeah, I was at the Brisbane Hotel one night, and I said, would you have a dark beer on tap? And it didn't have like a label, and they just started pouring it. So I drink a pint of this stuff. Second pint, third pint. We were there for some bands, and they was during like Dark Mofo or something. About six pints to 2 years old. I'm normally okay. My 6th pint of this one, I just fell over like that, and it turned out to be one of those 13% Russian stouts.
Oh my god!
They just hadn't had the label on. So in like, what's 13% in like 6 pints? That's what I'd had in the space of about 2 hours. But that night was the reason I remembered it was that the comedian Hannah Gadsby.
Oh yeah.
Right, and she talks about in her first Netflix special, she talks about getting in a punch on at a hotel in Tasmania. So a mate of mine told me years later that was that night at the Brisbane Hotel.
Really?
And I was like, man, I don't remember it because I drunk all these like Russian stouts and I had no memory of it. But apparently it was that night.
What, Hannah Gadsby knocked you out?
No, someone else knocked Hannah Gadsby out. That's what she says in the thing. Yeah, I missed it all because I
remember the Brisbane. They used to have a like a rather than have security in front of the band to stop you getting up on stage and jumping off and stage diving. They just had a really high plywood reinforced thing, and I got squashed up against it one night at what was it? It was a Septic Head Rot were playing. And I got this bruise across my whole front. It was like from being pressed up against this plywood thing. The whole front of me was like this black line down to
because it was quite high. I recall. Like, it was tall enough for me, but yeah, if
you couldn't climb over it, and it just totally like. Yeah,
but they don't. Last couple of times I was there, they don't really do bands in the big room like that anymore. They've got a little stage in the front bar now, and they do bands in there. But yeah, the Brisbane Hotel is one of the best venues in the country. Like,
for black metal, some great metal out of there. And speaking of the black, like necromancy, why don't we see, like world leaders anymore? Like, having a sidekick, like having a Rasputin, having like a Gurdjieff.
That's the job I was born to do,
I know,
right?
like
no one's hiring me for it.
You'd expect, like, well, we had Papa Doc in Haiti, like he was.
That would be a great job.
I mean, like,
I think the closest you get to a Rasputin right now globally is probably like Stephen Miller in Trump's office. Like, I love that guy. Stephen Miller is fantastic. I love that interview where he says, "I have nothing else. I have no family. This is it. This is all I do." Like that. That's him. But he doesn't have the same occult bent to it, right?
No.
You need someone like me who's going to be like going through chicken bones, maybe scrying through some like different mammal
doing
guts,
some I Ching,
crystals, Kabbalah,
wearing
just,
robes.
Yeah, runes, just casting
Nancy
runes.
Reagan was a big astrologer.
She was, yeah.
And-
And like Nancy Reagan's one of the reasons why it became popularized for like middle class housewives.
Yes.
In the early 1980s.
That's right. That's why it started turning up in the back
Yeah,
page
yeah,
of
that's
the
when it became
Women's
really
Weekly.
big.
It's like occult stuff, like that stuff that would have had you, burnt at the stake.
Exactly.
Like
right?
in the
I mean, some guys did get burnt at the stake for it. One thing I'm fascinated in about astrology, though, which no one really talks about, is how it's all ass backwards in the Southern Hemisphere. And different schools of astrology kind of patch this over with various like mystic methods. But like I like to believe that things have like some kind of physical basis. Like I prefer my occultism, rooted in the physical as opposed to the metaphysical. And
yeah, I like alchemy. Like I like the idea that you could turn a frog into someone,
or at least just melt gold.
Yeah, lead into gold.
Yeah,
someone's pulled it off.
It does. There are elements of astrology that make a lot of sense, particularly when you're kind of scrying like people's birth signs and then kind of figuring out how they're going to be for their entire lives. So, because as they relate to harvests and cycles of ancient
the influence of the moon. You look at the influence of the moon on mental health.
If you're the child of a farmer, it's more likely than not that you're going to be conceived during either a fallow period or spring, and that's going to like then influence your how you're going to grow up. And so then there is that fundamental basis to astrology. But then if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, it's all the other way around. So someone who would be born a Capricorn in the Northern Hemisphere is actually going to be born Aquarius in the Southern Hemisphere. So because astrology doesn't like the way it's kind of portrayed nowadays, it doesn't kind of really like take that into account. I think that is one of the things that kind of makes it a bit like crackpottish. So we should have like, astrology based on, the two hemispheres of the planet. And where you can actually observe stars, not just, as they are in the north.
Yeah, well, I like, there's an astrologer I follow. She's commercial, so I won't name her.
They do. It costs money.
They do cost money, that's right. And, her
That's why you got to learn to do it yourself. Yes.
Yeah, her star chart, and you can ask her anything. Who's going to win the election? Who's going to win, the NRL, all the rest. And she comes up with some pretty solid predictions. Better than, like I would say, like, as good as some of the pollsters.
Oh, yeah.
Way better than any of the polemicists. And because
way better than journalists, for sure.
Exactly, way better than journalists.
My followers on Twitter, I was posting about this a while ago, and we did end up correctly figuring out the date of the election based on cycles of the moon. And the basis for that was that Albanese had ruled out Passover, April 12, as being the election, which is like a date on the calendar which is intrinsically tied to the moon. So if you take that as your leaping off point, you could do a star chart and you could kind of...
Easter.
Yeah.
Easter, like how the fuck do they work out Easter?
Well, Easter is worked out as astrologically.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the earliest things that were. I mean, astrology...
No, stop. How do they fucking work it out? Well,
it's math nowadays. Nowadays, you can just count it back mathematically. And like you can predict where Easter's going to be like 30, 40 years from now. So they can actually do that.
Most people, it's just like a lucky dip. They just go, what the fuck?
But
they
this
just
is why astrologers were the like deep state of like Sumerian society, because they were the ones who could figure out when the grain was going to grow,
and they could work out when
the seasons were going to start,
when the eclipse was going to happen.
Yeah, which was always the good party trick, right? Like if you're the guy that can predict the eclipse, like you're getting laid that night. Like you're not paying for drinks. At
Watch
the bar.
this, guys.
Yeah. The best party trick there ever was.
I'm turning off the lights,
predicting an eclipse,
and now they're coming back on.
It's a pity out of all the things we've kind of forgotten how to do in modern society, like go to the moon, that no one's forgotten how to predict eclipses. Because if you could still just occasionally predict an eclipse, like you could be a political genius,
a king tide, all that. Maybe that's all Moses and those guys were doing. My favourite bit of occult lore is grand. I love old books.
Yeah,
I know you love old books. And the story of the Grand Grimoire, which is basically an old Necronomicon, like old book of spells. And there's a story about there being an eclipse during or like at about the time of it was a really like spiritual time about the time of the battle for the pyramids.
Yeah.
Between Napoleon and the Mamluks. Which was a fucking or actually Napoleon, I think, had bailed out, and most of his forces were dying of the plague. This dude runs into this French cavalry officer. They're being slaughtered by these camel riding, Bedouins, the Mamluks. He's at like this is a fucking true battle that happened out like next to the pyramids. This guy comes out, says, "Come on in," leads him into a secret chamber, hands him over the Grand Grimoire. This book that fucking exists.
Yeah, it actually does exist. And some of because the interesting thing about a lot of that, like,
which is a book of spells.
Yeah, some of this like classical magic, like classical hermetic literature is like every time you go back far enough to try and figure out where it starts from, and it just keeps going back.
Yes.
Until you're into like Hermes Trismegistus, like back in literally being in ancient Egypt. Like it just keeps appearing over and over again. I mean, like practically someone was obviously transcribing this stuff from a central source. And that's why things like, the Lesser Keys of Solomon, it's like an actual document that someone possessed 1,000 years ago that someone just kept writing down over and over again. That stuff is incredibly powerful. And on the conspiracy stuff, I mean, you do kind of detect that maybe throughout history, society's elites have generally put a lot of emphasis on that stuff, and they do kind of, in some way, enact some of these rituals in public life. Like there's like you said, with some of the weird statues we have. Some of this stuff is not coincidences.
Well, the Nazis were way into it,
Well, did you know, interestingly on that stuff, did you know that like the grandfather of Odinism, paganism, or the Germanic paganism, is actually an Australian?
No.
It was an Australian guy. Yeah. Someone sent that to me on Twitter the other day. I hadn't actually seen it before. And yeah, it was in like the late part of the 1915 to 1920. And he was an Australian guy. Who was a former pastor and preacher who just decided one day, actually, Odin's where it's at, and kind of put a lot of this stuff down in writing that would later get form the basis for, some of the Odinistic rite stuff that then emerges in Germany in the 1930s. Actually started with an Australian guy.
Fascinating, mate. That's truly fascinating. Well, look, we've been going for a while.
We have,
look,
yeah.
And
it's a big effort for someone to watch all of.
And if you've made
I'll be testing people online. I'll be saying, "Are you really a Macgowan head? Have you watched the entire thing?
You watched the entire thing.
Did you see the bit where we got into, anthroposophy?"
Anthroposophy, yeah, it's everywhere. And it's a weird. Like when they send kids to Steiner schools, you know what they do? They do like binding. They wrap the kids in.
Yeah,
they bind them.
That makes you calm down. I quite like the idea of that. I mean, it's unquestionable that my children will have autism.
I know when I'm having a fit, like I get tied.
You want to get in your hug box.
I get tied down. But look, John, you're a fascinating guy.
Thanks,
you're
man.
always a great ray.
And this is a great podcast. So the last time I did your podcast was the first one I'd ever done. And since then, I've done like 10.
Have you?
Yeah. And I've got to say, like, you're the most fun. I mean, I guess some of the people I've done podcasts with will watch this, but you are one of the most fun people to actually do one.
Oh, I really appreciate that, mate. Well, you're great talent. You've got heaps of interesting things to say, and look, we're going to get you back again and again because you're a really interesting guy. There's always lots to talk about. Really interested in your takes. Thanks, Jono.
Thank you, brother. See you, mate.
Remember, folks, like, subscribe, and share, and see you on the next edition.